Rebbe Noson, follower of Rebbe Nachman of Breslov. Likutey Halakhot. On Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim. Laws of Purim. Law 1. Regarding Purim and the reading of the Megillah, based upon the lesson in Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 56. Study there the entire lesson well. Section 1. The main power of the wicked kingdom, which is Haman Amalek, is when the holy Malkut kingdom is concealed, as in, I will conceal. Deuteronomy 31:18 as written, one nation will overpower the other nation. Genesis 25:23. That is why the kingdom of Ahasuerus was strengthened by the blemish and sin that he caused the Jewish people to do of enjoying the banquet he had prepared. For a blemish in eating causes the concealment of the countenance, as in, I will conceal my countenance, and this will happen because of eating. As the Rebbe interprets the verse in Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 47. This is because on account of a blemish in eating, when one's eating is not as it should be, one can fall from the 70 aspects of the Torah into sleep, which corresponds to a concealment of the countenance, as the Rebbe writes in Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 60. That is why Ahasuerus's plan was to hold the banquet at the end of the Babylonian exile, after the 70 years of exile in Babylon. For these 70 years of exile in Babylon correspond to sleep, corresponding to, is there someone who sleeps for 70 years? Tanit 23a, as stated in the lesson, as in, Anat, the days of our years are 70 years. Their flow is like sleep. Psalms 90:10-5. And when God returns, the returnees of Zion, we will be like dreamers. There, 126. One which refers to the 70 years of the Babylonian exile, as Rashi explains. That is why, at the end of these 70 years, at which time there was an intensification of sleep, corresponding to concealment when Haman and Ahasuerus saw that the Jewish people were still not redeemed and were not awakening from their sleep, they therefore thought that they would never be redeemed and aroused. For only until 70 years is there still hope of awakening from sleep, since they had still not fallen from all of the 70 aspects. For this reason, the redemption should have come immediately, at the precise end of the 70 years, and not tarry even for a moment. For would it be delayed beyond the 70 years, they would fall from all the 70 aspects, and then it would be very difficult to arouse them from sleep. Then it would be possible only through a glorious countenance, which can only take place through the Messiah. May he come speedily in our days, for he corresponds to a glorious countenance, as in, it reached the Ancient of Days, Daniel 7:9. The Ancient of Days, corresponding to a glorious countenance, as the Rebbe writes in Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 60. Study there well. Thus, when they saw that the Jewish people had not been redeemed at the end of the 70 years, though in fact they had erred in their reckoning, as our sages said, Megillah 11b, they therefore schemed to intensify the sleep even more greatly upon them, and to cast them down from all of the 70 aspects, which correspond to 70 years, through eating, for through eating one can fall into sleep. So they made a banquet at the end of the 70 years, so that the Jewish people would enjoy it, for this entire banquet was solely for the purpose of causing the Jewish people to stumble in forbidden foods. This is the meaning of our sages' teaching on the verse. When the king sat on his royal throne, he made a banquet. Esther 1:2. When his kingdom had become firmly established, he had erred in the reckoning. For on account of that mistake, he thought that the 70 years had already passed and they were still not redeemed, concluding that they would never be redeemed, for they would sleep beyond 70 years. That is why he specifically made a banquet to cause them to stumble, in order to intensify the sleep upon them and to cast them down from all the 70 years, the 70 aspects of the Torah, so that his own kingdom would thereby endure. Thus, in that banquet, the wicked Haman advised to kill Queen Vashti, which was all the plan of the forces of evil, so that Esther would then be taken to the king's palace in order to bring the holy Malkut into even greater concealment among them. However, Mordecai had the power to uncover the concealment, as well as the power to arouse and awaken the people from sleep and the fall from the 70 aspects on account of the blemish of eating. This was because Mordecai corresponds to abundant loving kindness, which corresponds to a glorious countenance, to the Ancient of Days, to stories of ancient times, through which it is possible to arouse even from sleep to all the 70 aspects, since the numerical value of the Hebrew letters of Mordecai is the same as the Hebrew letters for abundant loving kindness, 274, as the Rebbe states. This is why we find that the crux of the redemption was brought about by Mordecai's telling stories, as in Mordecai told Queen Esther, Esther 2:22, telling what had happened to Esther, who corresponds to concealment, to sleep, in order to thereby arouse from sleep and uncover the concealment. And indeed, that is what later happened. The redemption came about through, specifically, that as written, on that night, the king's sleep evaded him. There, 6:1, the sleep of the king, God Megillah 15b. This came about through the telling of stories about Mordecai. As written, the king said to bring the book of Chronicles, and it was found written that Mordecai had told 1. Finding stories about Mordecai, who corresponds to abundant loving kindness, for through the stories that Mordecai told Esther, who corresponds to the congregation of Israel, which had entered into a state of concealment, of sleep. Through this, they were able to awaken and arouse them from that sleep and bring them to repentance. And through that, they caused an arousal from sleep on high, as in the king's sleep evaded him. For through an arousal below comes an arousal on high. This corresponds to Esther told the king in Mordecai's name, Esther 2:22. For Esther, who corresponds to the congregation of Israel, was able to open her mouth and advocate on behalf of the Jewish people, telling and bringing the stories about Mordecai to the king, God, through which there was an arousal from sleep. This corresponds to the reading of the Megillah that was instituted to be read every year. This is the main mitzvah of Purim, to arouse the Jewish people every year from sleep through stories of ancient times, which corresponds to the Megillah, which is very precious, though it is entirely composed of stories, beginning from in the days of Ahasuerus until the end of the Megillah. It is all told as a story, specifically the story of Mordecai and Esther, corresponding to stories of ancient times, through which we arouse ourselves from sleep every year. This story of those times leads us to remembering every year, which corresponds to an arousal from sleep, which corresponds to forgetting, since sleep is the departing of the mind, which corresponds to sleep. And Haman sought to overpower them by casting a lot, which also corresponds to forgetting. This takes place every year, but through the reading of the Megillah, we counter the forgetting, the sleep. For this reason also our sages said that the scroll should be unrolled as a document when reading it Orach Chaim 690. For it is like a story that is being told from a document about events that took place in the times of Mordecai and Esther, corresponding to stories of ancient times. Section 2. The peak of Haman's power was in the month of Adar, which is when he sought to overpower the Jewish people upon realizing that Moses, who is the essence and totality of receiving the Torah, through which concealment is revealed, as stated in Likutey Halakhot, Part 1, 56, died in this month. He thus thought that since Moses was dead, the power of Torah study had dissipated, and that it was thus no longer possible to uncover the concealment, so he sought to overpower at this time. Haman counters the Holy Malkut, and the Holy Malkut is in concealment on account of a lack of Torah study, and then Haman Amalek is empowered. This corresponds to the voice is the voice of Jacob, and the hands are the hands of Esau. Genesis 27:22. When the voice is the voice of Jacob, then the hands of Esau are powerless. Genesis Rabbah 65:20. For through the voice of Jacob, which is Torah study, we thereby uncover the concealment, and then the evil Malkut, which corresponds to the hands of Esau, which is the kingdom of Haman Amalek, who descends from Esau, is powerless. This corresponds to the lot of Purim. On high, everything is entirely good, and there, even the realm of evil at its root is good. Only as things devolve do they separate into right and left, which are the realm of holiness and the realm of evil, whereas from on high come only and always a bounty of life, which is entirely good. But vessels must be made in which to receive this vitality, which is accomplished through the study of Torah, which corresponds to days and attributes, through which we are able to receive the vitality into days and attributes, as explained in the lesson. So when there is no Torah study, then the realm of evil steps forward and receives the vitality that flows from on high, as in a slave that rules and a maidservant who inherits her mistress. Proverbs 30:22. Now the lot corresponds to the world of the future, as written, rest, and you will arise to your lot at the end of days. Daniel 12:13, as the Rebbe alludes to elsewhere, Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 57. And there, in the world of the future, the lot is inevitably all good. For everything there is entirely good, with no evil at all. From there downward, there is a division into two lots, one lot for God and one lot for God. Leviticus 16:8, which corresponds to the power of free will, in that every individual has the power to choose for themselves their lot and portion. That is why one must meticulously guard one's memory, to bind one's thought to the world of the future, from down here, in the realm of days, in this world. It is very difficult for a human being to choose the good lot, because both paths are open and available, and sometimes one can err and see the good as evil and the evil as good. However, when one binds one's thought to the world of the future, in which everything is good, everything is one lot for God, then one's steps will surely not slip, for then one is able to evoke the path of good, so that one can follow it in this world, and choose the path of life and good for oneself, even within the days of this world. By constantly binding one's thought to the world of the future, from where all paths emerge. This corresponds to, see that I have given before you today life and good and death and evil, but you shall choose the life, Deuteronomy 30:15, prefaced by the defining article, the, referring to the life of the world of the future, which is the source of life. In other words, since there are two paths laid before us, therefore the strategy is to bind one's thought to the world of the future and choose that life, eternal life, from where one can evoke for oneself the proper path of life to follow in this world. This is why King David boasted for the good lot that fell to him from on high, in that he was showered with the bounty of the supernal lot, corresponding to the world of the future, which is entirely God's, such that even below, in this world, he had a good lot to be in God's portion. Thus, God is my allotted portion, my share. Psalm 16:5. For he was privileged to be in God's portion for. You led me to my destiny, you, corresponding to the world of the future, as in, you are Hashem God, Nehemiah 9:7, which corresponds to the world of the future, which is entirely good, as in, Hashem is God, 1 Kings 8:60, there 18:39. Thus, you led me to my destiny, you, corresponding to the world of the future, from there descended my good fortune to be in God's portion. All this through the Torah, through which we evoke life into the days and the attributes, meaning that we evoke life from the source of life, from the world of the future, into the days and attributes, in order to attain a good lot. The verse then says, portions have fallen to me with pleasantness, in that I was privileged for a pleasant portion through. My inheritance is pleasing to me, which is through the Torah, which is called a pleasant portion, as in words of pleasantness. Psalms 49:21. Since the Torah corresponds to splendor. This corresponds to Aaron shall place lots on the 2 goats, Leviticus 16:8. For in order to evoke God's lot on the right and the other lot on the left, the priest had to raise and elevate both lots of right and left to God. For there, in their source, everything is good. Then he is able to evoke from there as he wishes, giving each one its appropriate portion, not exchanging God's with the left, which was liable to take place when the high priest was unfitting and was unable to bind his thought in the world of the future. That is why the verse says that the wicked Haman cast the lot, seeking to literally cast the lot down, to draw the lot, which is the source of life, to himself, for his own portion, to evoke good fortune and life to the realm of evil. Thus, casting the lot corresponds to forgetfulness, as said earlier, which is the realm of death, as in, I have been forgotten from the heart as someone dead, Psalms 31:13. He wanted to draw the lot down into his portion below, which corresponds to forgetfulness, to the realm of death, in contrast to the lot that corresponds to the world of the future, which is the source of life, corresponding to remembering. Thus, seeking to draw the lot down below to his portion, corresponding to forgetfulness, his lot fell in the month of Adar, the month of Moses' death, misleading Haman to think that since the power of the Torah study was thereby ended, he would be able to evoke the lot for himself. This is, he cast a lot from month to month, the 12th month, the month of Adar. See Likutey Halakhot, Part 1, 10. But the fact was, the Mordecai, who also embodied the Torah, had the power to uncover the concealments and to subdue him, extracting from him all nourishment that he had drawn from holiness and transforming it into new Torah, as in, it swallowed wealth and vomited it up, Job 20:15, as the Rebbe says in the lesson. In other words, Mordecai had the power to subdue the evil and to elevate the life force from there, all the way up to the root of its nourishment, from the source of life, at which point the vitality that had been exiled in Haman would be transformed into new Torah. This corresponds to what the Rebbe writes there, that through subduing the melancholic spirit, which is the filth of the serpent, which corresponds to Amalek, the sadness of the hands, Genesis 5:29, which corresponds to Moses' hands were heavy, Exodus 17:12, is thereby subdued, and then the hands can be raised, as in, I shall raise my hands to heaven, Deuteronomy 32:40, from where we receive words, as in, these and those are words of the living God, Eruvin 13b. This means that by subduing the evil, we thereby elevate the hands, the right hand and the left hand, the source of the realm of evil's power, elevating them both on high, up to the world of the future, which corresponds to the heavens' fire and water binding them together, as in, these and those are the words of the living God, entirely good, entirely one, as in, he established the heavens with understanding, Proverbs 3:19, which corresponds to, who can contemplate the thunder of his might? Job 26:14, specifically, who can contemplate, corresponding to the understanding of the world of the future, in which everything is one. And these and those are the words. The hands must be elevated all the way up to there, and then a very great intelligence can be evoked from there, corresponding to a new Torah that comes from this concealment, as in, it swallowed wealth and vomited it up. This is because this Torah is a very sublime and exalted Torah, corresponding to the Megillah, which also comes from there. For on account of Haman's empowerment, a very great concealment came about, as in, I will greatly conceal, Deuteronomy 31:18. So when the people later were able to overcome him, this concealment was transformed into a new Torah, which is the Megillah, which is the new Torah that came from there, as we have written about this in the Laws of Torah reading. That is why the book of Esther is called the Megillah, for it uncovers the concealment. Section 3. And this takes place in every single generation, and for each and every individual Jewish person, when they sincerely repent. For this itself is repentance. When one veers from the proper path and chooses for oneself a bad portion, then it is impossible for one to be rectified and return to the proper path other than through repentance, which corresponds to Shabbat, to the world of the future. End quote. This means that one must inevitably be refined and tested with that path that one had followed, which is a repentance of balance, which means that one must return and pass through those very places, the bad paths in which one had previously been, breaking one's desire and turning away from them, having to walk the entire way of all those paths until one returns to one's place, to the high road, the route of both paths, in which everything is good, and from which the two paths split and spread out. This corresponds to set for yourself signs, fix for yourself bidders, focus your heart to the path that you followed. Jeremiah 31:20. This verse refers to repentance, as our sages said, Sifri Ekev 11, in that one must set one's heart to the path that one previously followed, returning specifically through it to God. That is repentance. Thus, one must set signs for oneself so that one does not stumble and err, since one has already stumbled along those paths, for they are very confusing and complex paths. One must guard oneself greatly and set signs for oneself so that one does not get trapped again. This is fix for yourself bidders, which is the bitterness of the heart that one bears while returning to those very bitter paths in order to return along them to the high road, as said. For one must bear great and very harsh bitterness until one passes through all of those bitter paths and returns safely to the high road, which corresponds to the world of the future, which corresponds to repentance. This precisely is why repentance is called teshuvah, for one must return all things to their root, in which everything is entirely good. In sum, the essence of repentance is that one must return and elevate even the left path to its source, which is accomplished through returning and passing through the previous paths. For by elevating the life force from there, which is the holy sparks that had fallen into there on account of one's sins, restoring them to their root, which corresponds to repentance, thus returning all the crooked paths to their root in repentance, then there all of those sins and paths transform into new Torah, as in, it swallowed wealth and vomited it up, for it transforms into a woman of valor. Proverbs 31:10, which is new Torah. The Rebbe writes similarly elsewhere, that the sins for which the Jewish people will do authentic repentance will be transformed into new Torah. Section 4. This corresponds to the mitzvah to remember Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you. Deuteronomy 25:17. The entire story of Amalek was the overpowering of the realm of evil over the weak ones of the Jewish people whom the cloud had expelled, whom Amalek was thereby able to mislead, who must be elevated and returned to their place, to repentance, which corresponds to the clouds of glory, to the sukkah, to the mother hovering on the children. This then is, remember what Amalek did to you. Specifically, remember, for we must restore the memory of Amalek to memory, which corresponds to the world of the future, to repentance. This is accomplished every single year, as in, these days are remembered and celebrated every single year, in every single family, every single country, every single city. Esther 9:28. For each and every individual, when they are victorious in the battle against Amalek and attain repentance, thereby restore the days which correspond to the attributes, in which is free choice. For there are good days and bad days, but they all return to their place, which is repentance, which corresponds to memory, which is above days, where everything is good. There they are renewed and become good days, which is Torah. This corresponds to, return us, O God, to you, and we will return. Renew our days as of old. Lamentations 5:21. When we are able to return to God in repentance, the days are renewed as of old, which corresponds to the reading of the Megillah every year. For every single year, the miracle of the downfall of Haman Amalek takes place. That is why we celebrate Purim and read the Megillah that was composed about this. Section 5. So we must specifically write the story, and if one were to tell it orally, one has not fulfilled the obligation, even though the main reason is to publicize the miracle, and telling the story orally would be sufficient. We can explain this based on what was said earlier. The Megillah came about through the uncovering of the concealment, which means the restoring of the concealment, the realm of evil to its place and root, which corresponds to the elevation of the hands that is accomplished through this uncovering. For the main power of the realm of evil is in the hands, as in the sadness of the hands, Genesis 5:29, and through the sighing that one sighs in regret over one's sins, repenting for one's evil ways, one thereby elevates the hands up to heaven to repentance. This corresponds to, when I raise my hands to heaven and say, I live forever, Deuteronomy 32:40. I live corresponds to the world of the future, the source of life, as in, I am your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. Exodus 22. For one must raise the hands till there, which is the right hand and the left hand, from which the realm of evil draws its power. Then new words are formed there, and one then evokes from their very exalted Torah, as the words are received from the hands. Hence, the Megillah is formed from the words that are received from the hands, through having elevated them up to repentance, to the world of the future, in which the hands are rooted, through which we receive words from the hands, which is the new Torah that is formed from the sins and the forces of evil that have been transformed into the good, which corresponds to the Megillah that comes about through this. That is why it must be specifically written in order to bring the words into the hands, in order to literally receive them in the hands. This corresponds to, write this as a commemoration in a book, there 17:14, which refers to the battle with Amalek, but also alludes to the redemption, as our sages said, Megillah, there, specifically write, and specifically a commemoration for the battle with Amalek and the victory over them, which then becomes memory, must be brought into writing in order to evoke the words into the hands so that we can receive them from there, in order to transform everything into its opposite, for the main empowerment and nourishment is from the hands, as is written there regarding the battle with Amalek, Moses' hands were heavy. Section 6. This corresponds to, one is obligated to become intoxicated on Purim until one can no longer differentiate between cursed be Haman and blessed be Mordechai, Megillah 7b. One must ascend at this time up to memory, as in, remember what Amalek did to you, up to the supernal lot, the root of all lots, where everything is good and where there is no evil at all. For only from below that do the two lots of cursed be Haman and blessed be Mordechai split into two. Section 7. This is the Purim meal. Now, after intelligence has been rectified and one has attained a dispute for the sake of heaven, which corresponds to words received from the hands, as explained in the lesson, which corresponds to the downfall of Haman Amalek and the reading of the Megillah, which corresponds to the intelligence of the uncovering of concealment, we thereby now attain bread from heaven, corresponding to the eating of manna to matzah. Thus, it is now a mitzvah to specifically eat bountifully, for eating on this day corresponds to intelligence, to bread from heaven, to a dispute for the sake of heaven, which is the wholeness of intelligence, as explained in the lesson. And through the eating of this meal of Purim, the blemish of eating caused by the people's enjoying the banquet which caused a very great blemish in the intelligence, and an intensification of the concealment, is rectified, for this eating is the exact opposite of that, since it is the wholeness of intelligence. This is why our sages said, the Jewish people had light. Esther 8:16. This is the Torah. Megillah 16b. For through Torah study, the concealments are uncovered, which is the miracle of Purim. This corresponds to the gifts for the poor, for the extent of compassion is to the extent of one's intelligence, as explained in the lesson. This corresponds to the charity of the gifts for the poor that is attained through compassion, through the intelligence. For charity also corresponds to peace, as in, whoever increases charity increases peace. Avot 2:7. All of which is dependent upon intelligence, through which compassion and peace are increased. Thus, we send gifts even to the wealthy, all for the purpose of greatly increasing peace, since we have now attained very great intelligence. Furthermore, through charity we subdue the kingdom of Haman Amalek, which counters the holy Malkut and seeks to overwhelm with lust for wealth, as explained in the lesson. But through charity we subdue the lust for wealth, as explained in Likutey Moharan, Part 1:13. Law 2. Based on the lesson in Likutey Moharan, Part 1:17, the entire subject of Purim will be explained well. Study there the entire lesson. Section 1. Haman sought to annihilate the entire Jewish people, thereby seeking to negate the pride that God has from his people Israel. That is why he sought to overcome them in the month of Adar, in which Moses had departed, for Moses had revealed this pride, through which he was able to bring the Torah, which corresponds to God's pride in the Jewish people from the Torah that they observe into the world. That is why the manifestation of the divine desires and intentions in creation came through the Torah, as written in the beginning. For the Torah, which is called the beginning, and for the Jewish people who are called the beginning Midrash. This is because the Torah and God are one, since God's pride in his people Israel comes through the Torah, which is why the Torah is called splendor, through which Moses was able to receive the Torah by being able to manifest the pride derived from each and every single Jewish person, even from the lowliest of the lowliest, as stated in Likutey Moharan, Part 2:82, about Moses' binding himself to the lowliest of the Jewish people and finding in them godliness, for he was the humblest of human beings. Through that he was able to carve a trodden path during the month of Elul and bring the Torah into the world. Thus, Moses received the crown of splendor, as written, "May Moses rejoice in the gift of his portion." You laid a crown of splendor on his head when he stood before you. Shabbat prayers, for through the Epiphany at Mount Sinai, when he received the Torah, which corresponds to splendor, as said, he therefore received a crown of splendor, since everything came about through him. That is why Haman sought to overcome the Jewish people specifically in the month that Moses died, which is why his method of doing so was mainly through causing them to blemish in eating by enjoying the king's banquet, which was done upon Haman's counsel, in order to cause them to stumble in forbidden foods. Through this blemish in eating, the people's intelligence was blemished, for on account of this, the tzaddik, who manifests the splendor, is concealed, from which Haman and the forces of evil draw their nourishment, which comes from a blemish in the altar, which is a blemish in eating. For through this, intelligence, from which they draw nourishment, becomes confused. This is why Haman declared himself an object of worship, for idolatry also draws its nourishment from there, from a blemish of the altar. This is why our sages said that Haman is alluded to in the verse, "Was it from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from that you ate?" Genesis 3:11, Chulin 139b. For his main nourishment comes from a blemish in eating, through which the intelligence is blemished, which corresponds to the blemish of the eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. For, on account of a blemish in eating, the light of the tzaddik, who manifests splendor, is concealed, and the splendor itself is thus concealed. From this fall of splendor, idolatry draws its nourishment, as the Rebbe writes elsewhere, which is why Haman declared himself an object of worship. Thus, we must rectify the blemish in the altar and attain kosher eating, for specifically then, through such eating, is intelligence exalted and made whole. This is accomplished through charity, which corresponds to the gifts to the poor that we give on Purim, through which love and peace are increased, through which the air is made calm and clear, through which the words of Mordechai become written in the nation's books, as in, it was found written that Mordechai had told. Esther 6:2. This corresponds to the reading of the Megillah, which corresponds to the writing that is caused by Mordechai, in that it became written and inscribed in their books, through which the miracle came about. This is because, through this, proselytes convert, which corresponds to many of the peoples became Jewish, there, 8:17, on account of which the blemish of the altar was made whole, through which intelligence was made whole, through which the light of the tzaddik, who manifests the pride derived from the Jewish people, is revealed, through which Haman, who draws nourishment from the blemish of the altar, has his downfall. Study well in the lesson. Thus, the Megillah was essentially composed to be written in the nation's chronicles, for which reason there is no divine name written throughout the Megillah, since it was intended to become part of their literature. For the very essence of the Megillah corresponds to writing, in that it was inscribed and written in their books through Mordechai, through which the miracle of Haman came about. This is the meaning of what is written. The powerful and mighty deeds, as well as the story of Mordechai's greatness, they are written in the Book of Chronicles of the kings of Medes and Persia, Esther 10:2. We find no other similar verse anywhere else. At most, the verse will say that more details are written in the chronicles of the kings of Israel and Judah. However, here, the verse explicitly states that the greatness of the miracle and that of Mordecai are written mainly in the nation's books. For it is there that we see Mordecai's greatness and that of the miracle that he did, in that he was able to create such writing in their books, through which he extracted the good that was buried among them so deeply at them me. That time, bringing about such a great miracle through this writing. This is the meaning of what our sages said about Mordechai studying the laws of the meal offering when Haman came to ride him on the horse, saying to him, "Your handful of meal offering has neutralized my 10,000 talents of silver." Megillah 16a. Specifically, a handful of meal offering corresponding to the sacrificial offerings, which are the wholeness of the altar, through which Haman's downfall came about. This corresponds to the gifts given to one another on Purim, all for the sake of increasing peace, through which the air becomes calm, and all the charity of gifts to the poor on Purim is also for this same purpose. Thus, it is a great obligation to eat on Purim and to make a very large meal for the ultimate wholeness of intelligence, its rectification, and the subdual of foolishness from which Haman is nourished. Comes through kosher eating, as explained in the lesson, which is accomplished through charity and the reading of the Megillah. That is why the custom is to make the meal in the late afternoon, after we have completed the rectifications of Purim, through which intelligence is made complete. Then it becomes permissible to eat, and it is a great mitzvah to eat a large meal, for now eating is the ultimate wholeness of intelligence. This is why we fast before Purim on the fast of Esther, for a fast is the rectification of the lust for eating, as the Rebbe says elsewhere, which itself corresponds to charity, as in, "The reward of a fast is charity," Brachot 6b, through which the blemish in eating is rectified. This is why some people give gifts to the poor on the fast of Esther, for charity and a fast are one and the same, and they must precede the rectification, for through them came about the miracle, since the ultimate rectification of the blemish in eating is charity, as explained in the lesson. Law 3. Based upon the lesson in Likutey Halakhot, Part 2, 5. Study there the entire lesson. In sum, when we rectify a blemish in faith, proselytes come to convert, and they introduce haughtiness into the Jewish people, which causes the blemish of sexual lust. The defenders of the generation, though, elevate the blemish of sexual lust, which is then transformed into tefillin mind, corresponding to the seal of holiness. Then comes a dream through an angel, which corresponds to a human being, rather than a dream through a demon, which corresponds to an animal. But foods are also a factor in dreams, which is why joy, which strengthens the angel, is required. And the main time for strengthening the angel is in the month of Nisan, when the blemish of this defilement should rightfully be neutralized. However, it can sometimes come on account of a damage to judgment, and judgment can be damaged by elevating the drop of Esau and Ishmael, and then, on account of the damage to the thrones of justice, loves fall from the chariot, which is why the chariot must be bound, as in, his chariot is the four-letter acronym for archangels. Study there the entire lesson well. Section 1. The wicked Haman, a descendant of Amalek, the appointee over the blemish of this defilement, sought to overpower the Jewish people during the 70-year Babylonian exile, which corresponds to sleep. His main method was through a blemish in eating, as our sages said. Why did the Jewish people of that generation deserve annihilation? Because they enjoyed the banquet. Megillah 12a. This is because defiled foods correspond to the blemish of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, in which Adam blemished, on account of which he also blemished in the drops of the mind, on account of which he was cursed with. With sadness will you eat it. Genesis 3:17. That is why the main rectification is through joy, to counter, with sadness will you eat it. But this rectification can only be accomplished through pure food that is eaten with joy. Whereas defiled foods forbidden by the Torah have no rectification at all. Thus, sadness befalls whoever enjoys them, for they are the blemish of Adam's sin, from which arose this defilement, upon which Haman Amalek is appointed, on account of which the Jewish people deserved annihilation, since regarding this blemish is said, on the day that you eat of it, you will die. There, 2:17. So our sages also gave another reason why they deserved annihilation, because they prostrated to the image, and the two reasons are one and the same, and are interdependent. Their prostrating to an idol is a blemish in faith, which is the beginning of the blemish, and this blemish in faith then led to the blemish of this defilement, as explained in the lesson. And our sages also state that Adam blemished in faith. He denied the essential point, Sanhedrin 38b. For all of the above is intertwined, a blemish in faith, the blemish of this defilement, and the blemish of foods, as explained well in the lesson. This is because Haman's power came from the blemish of the tree of knowledge. As our sages said, where is Haman alluded to in the Torah? Was it from the tree? Chulin 139b. Thus, Haman sought to overpower the people during the month of Adar, in which Moses died. For Moses' death corresponds to a departing of intelligence, corresponding to sleep, which is when Haman is empowered, when all of the above are not in a rectified state. Section 2. Now, the angel is strengthened mainly in the month of Nisan, as explained in the lesson, for that is the time when appointments are given to all the angels, so it is a time of desire, and therefore a time of their joy. Thus, Haman planned to overcome the people in the month of Adar, which is the most distant one from Nisan, assuming that the more distant a month is from Nisan, the weaker that power of the angel will be. So, he sought to overcome them specifically in Adar, which is the last month of the year beginning from Nisan. That is why the verse explicitly states, he cast a lot from day to day and from month to month to the 12th, which is the month of Adar, Esther 3:7 specifically, to the 12th. For that was exactly his evil plan, since it is the 12th month from Nisan, the furthest one from it, since there is no month that is further. For Adar is the last month of the year. So that is why he sought to overcome the people in this month, assuming that the angel has already been very weakened, since the strengthening happens in Nisan. This explains what he said to the king. There is a people, they sleep. Megillah 13b. For his main power is during sleep. Section 3. The rectification for this is through a fast, as written, "Fast for me," Esther 4:15. Since a fast is the rectification for a blemish in foods, since through a fast comes joy, which corresponds to a fast over a dream, as explained well in the lesson. This is why Purim was established as a day of rejoicing, drinking, and festivities, for the ultimate rectification comes through joy, which is the rectification of foods corresponding to the strengthening of the angel. This corresponds to the Purim meal. We must specifically make a large meal on Purim, since we then attained the rectification of foods. So it is now a great mitzvah to rejoice and make a large meal, thereby fulfilling, "Go and eat your bread with joy," Ecclesiastes 9:7, which is the rectification of sleep, the rectification of this defilement, as explained in the lesson. This is why our sages said, when Adar enters, we increase joy. Ta'anit 26b for the ultimate rectification comes through joy, which is the strengthening of the angel. This is why our sages stressed when Adar enters, for the greatest joy should actually be from the beginning of Nisan, for it is the time of the renewal of desire, which is a time of joy, however, since Haman had planned against us to overpower us in Adar through a blemish in foods. Therefore, since we were able to overcome him through the rectification of joy, therefore we now begin to rejoice from Adar. Thus, when Adar enters, we increase joy, meaning immediately upon the entry of Adar, we begin to rejoice, for that strengthens the angel in order to thereby subdue and break the power of Haman. Nevertheless, we are able to strengthen the power of the angel throughout the year, which is accomplished through joy, for through joy is the power of the angel strengthened, as if desire was renewed at this time. Thus, joy begins from Adar, which is when the angel is strengthened, and that is why his downfall took place in Nisan, for that is the main time for the strengthening of the angel. Section 4. This is the meaning of our sages' teaching. Why did Esther invite Haman to the banquet? To fulfill the verse, "If your enemy is hungry, feed him bread, for you are shoveling coals on his head." Proverbs 25:21. Megillah 15b. Specifically, coals. This is because Haman draws his power from the blemishing of foods, and his main power is when the angel is not strengthened, when the demons instead receive and draw great nourishment from the foods. Then the power of the demon becomes mixed into the foods, and since the demons are receiving the power of the angels are then in the category of their appearance was like flaming coals of fire, Ezekiel 1:13. Thus, when the demons receive the power of the angel, they heat the human being with sexual defilement with those flames. That was Esther's intention in inviting Haman to the banquet, so that she would give him food to eat that specifically she would give to him, which is the rectification of foods when we give the forces of evil to eat. Since when the angel is weak, then the forces of evil draw a lot of the bounty, and we are only nourished by the remains. Since the demons draw most of the sustenance, and the power of the demon becomes mixed into the foods, that is why sustenance then goes to the nations abundantly. But when the angel is strong, when the demons are sustained only to a bare minimum for their survival, then all of the bounty is ours, and then they are only sustained from the remains. We then are sustaining them, which is a very great rectification when we portion out sustenance to them, for the fact is that we must supply them with a bare minimum for their survival. Hence, when we provide sustenance to them, this corresponds to the rectification of foods, and for this reason Esther invited Haman to fulfill the verse, "If your enemy is hungry." For indeed we must provide for their survival at a minimum, which is a great rectification, since we are giving them. This is, for you are shoveling coals on his head, specifically coals, since now the story is the other way around. When they receive on their own and draw abundant nourishment, which is when the angel is weak, then they are the ones receiving the power of the angel, which corresponds to coals of fire, and they thereby are able to overpower us. But now that we have attained the rectification of foods through the fasting, now Esther invited Haman to show that he no longer has the power to draw nourishment, but that she must provide for him, and as known, when the forces of evil receive intentional sustenance from holiness, it is in order to subdue and humble them. Thus, now that Esther provided bounty to Haman, who embodied the realm of evil, she was certainly shoveling coals on his head, specifically coals, the coals of fire, corresponding to the power of the angels, whose appearance is like coals of fire. Now that they are receiving the power of the angel at a bare minimum for their survival, that itself is their subdual, and then the coals of the angels ignite them and consume them, for they emerged from fire, and fire will consume them. There, 15:7. This is because the rule is that when they receive an abundance of bounty, then they are able to overpower us, for then they are receiving the power of the angel who corresponds to coals of fire. But when they are unable to receive a bounty, but only what we give to them for their bare survival, which corresponds to their subdual, then, on the contrary, the coals of the angel then fall on their heads, burning and consuming them. This is, for you are shoveling coals on his head, specifically, coals. Section 5. This corresponds to sending portions to one another on Purim, specifically portions corresponding to the manna that descended from heaven, which is the realm of the angels, corresponding to the strengthening of the angels, corresponding to mirth and joy, as explained in the lesson. Thus, the manna that descended from there was a very holy food, for the realm of evil had no grip over it at all, since it descended from heaven, which is the strengthening of the angel. That is why the manna was covered underneath and above with dew, as if lying in a basket, to show that the forces of evil have no grip on it at all, as something lying in a basket that no one can touch. This is because the manna had no chaff, since the forces of evil had no power over it at all. This corresponds to the portions of Purim, to show that foods are rectified now, so now the bounty of each individual overflows to others with great abundance, for now we have no fear of the forces of evil at all. Since now they have no power over the foods, since now the angel is empowered through the joy of Purim. That is why it is specifically called sending portions, corresponding to the manna that descended from heaven, the sight of mirth and joy, which empowers the angel. That is why the custom is to cover the gifts of portions with a napkin, alluding to the manna that was as if lying in a basket, similarly to as stated regarding covering the Shabbat bread in commemoration of the manna. For the portions of Purim also correspond to the manna that was as if lying in a basket, since the realm of evil has no power at all over the Purim foods, since the angel is now empowered. Section 6. The wicked Haman also sought to overcome the Jewish people through a blemish in judgment, as explained in the lesson. Study there well regarding the blemish of judgment that is caused by bad tefillin, which is when precedence is given to the drop of Esau and Ishmael, which is rectified through the binding of the chariot, which corresponds to thrones of judgment. So the wicked Haman, who descended from Agag and overpowered the Jewish people on account of Saul's blemish after his battle with Amalek when he left Agag alive, also on account of Saul's having mercy on the choice sheep, which corresponds to a blemish in judgment that is caused by bad tefillin, by giving precedence to the drop of Esau and Ishmael. This is because Amalek is the head of nations, Numbers 24:20, since it is comprised of Esau and Ishmael, which are the totality of all nations, since it is the head of nations and comprised of them all. It is the essence of all the filth of the serpent, which corresponds to the drop of Esau and Ishmael, who have no rectification. That is why Saul was instructed to annihilate from ox to lamb, from camel to donkey. 1 Samuel 15:3, in order to completely eradicate all trace of them. For all things in the world require rectification, since all things were blemished on account of Adam's sin in the drops of the mind, which corresponds to sealed his flesh, Leviticus 15:3, on account of which all things have fallen into the realm of evil. We are constantly involved in rectifying all things in the world to elevate and sort them out of the realm of evil, from sealed his flesh, elevating them to the mind, in which all sparks are rectified, for all things are sorted out with thought. That is the ultimate rectification, elevating all sparks that have fallen into the realm of evil and that have spread throughout all things in the world, into the inanimate, plants, animals, and humans, on account of Adam's sin. They must all be elevated to the mind, which corresponds to elevating from sealed his flesh into tefillin mind, as explained in the lesson. But there are things that we must not rectify, for they are in the category of the drop of Esau and Ishmael that have no rectification. This corresponds to all the prohibitions in the Torah, for they correspond to the drop of Esau and Ishmael, to the filth of the serpent, and have no rectification. On the contrary, when they are elevated to the mind, then the mind itself is blemished, and this causes a damage of judgment, on account of which the defilement is even more intensified. Thus Amalek, which is the filth of the serpent, corresponding to the drop of Esau and Ishmael, must not be allowed to leave any trace in the world. That is why Saul was commanded to kill even the animals from ox to lamb, and so on, for they are all in the category of the drop of Esau and Ishmael that have no rectification. We must not attempt to rectify them and elevate them to the mind, for the mind would become blemished as a result if they are elevated. But King Saul erred in this and allowed King Agag of Amalek to live, as well as pitying the choice sheep to offer up to God. This was a very great blemish, corresponding to a blemish in tefillin. He wanted to elevate Amalek's animals as sacrificial offerings, for the essence of an offering is elevating and rectifying the animal power, which is the power of imagination, rectifying it into the human realm, as written, when a person wants to come close as an offering to God, from the animal, shall you bring your offering. Leviticus 1:2. This is because the essence of an offering is elevating from animal to human, which corresponds to elevating from sealed his flesh to tefillin mind, as explained in the lesson. Study there well. But Saul, who sought to elevate the animals of Amalek, which corresponds to the drop of Esau and Ishmael, therefore blemished in the tefillin. For when we elevate the drop of Esau and Ishmael, the mind and the tefillin are thereby blemished, and this causes a damage to judgment. And his blemish in have mercy on Agag was because we must not have compassion on them, since compassion is an expression of the intelligence. So when we have compassion on someone, we are thereby evoking intelligence upon them. So when Saul had compassion on King Agag of Amalek, he thereby blemished the tefillin, for he thereby elevated Amalek, who corresponds to the drop of Esau and Ishmael, into compassion and intelligence, which caused a blemish in judgment. So he erred in several ways. He judged David and the priestly town of Nov as rebels against the kingdom, unjustly judging them as deserving death, as our sages indeed said that Saul was unable to come to the proper conclusion of the law, Sanhedrin 93b, which is a blemish in judgment on account of the above. That is why he was banished from the kingship, since the holy kingship is dependent upon the eradicating of Amalek, which corresponds to the rectification of the covenant, since the holy Malkut corresponds to a God-fearing woman, which is sustained through the rectification of the covenant, which is dependent upon the eradication of Amalek. This is why Samuel said to Saul, God has sent me to anoint you as king over Israel, so now go and strike. 1 Samuel 15:1 For the rectification of Saul's kingship, which is the holy kingship, was dependent upon this. That is why when he blemished in this, he forfeited the kingship, as written there, because you have loathed God's word, he has loathed you as king. Section 7. In fact, Saul was chosen as the first king of Israel because he corresponded to the binding of the chariot, since he corresponded to the rectification of judgment. Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin, and the binding of the chariot corresponds to Benjamin, since Jacob's bed was whole. Because the drops of Esau and Ishmael had already been sorted out, see all this in the laws of fat and blood. Thus, Jacob corresponded to the rectification of judgment. As written, you did judgment and charity in Jacob, Psalms 99:4. And as written, judgment for the God of Jacob, there, 81:5. That is why Jacob attained the full rectification of the covenant and guarded it completely from sealed his flesh, as written, my strength and the first of my virility, Genesis 49:3. Thus, he attained a whole bed and sired the 12 tribes of God, who correspond to the rectification and binding of the holy chariot. Since the 12 tribes are divided into 4 flags, corresponding to the 4 camps of holiness, which correspond to his chariot, is the 4-letter acronym for archangels. But the main binding of the chariot is Benjamin. For he completed Jacob's whole bed, as written in the Holy Zohar, about Benjamin's having been born in the land of Israel, and not while Jacob was still with Laban, so that Jacob's bed, which corresponds to the holy chariot, would not be made whole in Laban's house, outside the land of Israel. Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 158b. Hence, the wholeness of the holy bed is mainly through Benjamin, who was born the last and who completed the holy bed. Then, when Benjamin was born, the bed became whole, which corresponds to the binding of the chariot, which is why Benjamin had the privilege of the temple being constructed in his portion. For the temple corresponds to the binding of the chariot. For the holy chariot is rectified there, since that is the site where the divine presence and the entire chariot rest, as stated in the Song of Songs. King Solomon made for it a canopy, its chariot argument, Song of Songs 3:10. All this refers to the sanctuary and the temple, as Rashi explains there. That is why the ultimate rectification of judgment is in the temple. For in the temple was the tribunal, where laws were decided, from which true judgments emerged for the Jewish people, from the court of the high tribunal. Thus, Benjamin, who corresponds to the binding of the chariot, had the privilege of having the temple constructed in his portion, for he corresponds to the binding of the chariot, which corresponds to the rectification of judgment. That is why the first king was his descendant, for the kingdom of holiness corresponds to the binding of the chariot, which is the rectification of judgment, which corresponds to the rectification of the covenant. Thus, it was appropriate that his descendant would eradicate Amalek, who is the exact opposite of the binding of the chariot, of the rectification of judgment. That is why Saul, who blemished in this, was banished from being king, since the kingship of holiness is dependent upon the eradication of Amalek. And on account of a blemish in this, Saul's blemish in judgment, by allowing Agag and the choice of the sheep to survive Haman Amalek, therefore later arose to overpower the Jewish people. Hence, Amalek is the beginning and the end of the damage. The initial damage, which was a damage in judgment, came about through Amalek, through Saul's having compassion on Amalek, and, on account of that blemish itself, arose Haman Amalek. For by having compassion on them, a blemish in judgment was caused, on account of which Haman Amalek was able to overpower the Jewish people with sexual defilement. Section 8. That is why Haman cast a lot, for a lot corresponds to judgment, which is the clarification of things, in that it clarifies each individual's judgment, as Rashi explains in several places. Similarly, a lot is also the clarification of things. As written, a lot puts disputes to rest. Proverbs 18:18, for the holy lot clarifies the true judgment. That is why the land of Israel was apportioned by a lot through the high priest who was wearing the breastplate of judgment, as Rashi explains, since the lot corresponds to judgment that clarifies each individual's judgment and portion. Thus, the wicked Haman, who was nourished from a blemish in judgment, therefore cast a lot in order to blemish the holy lot, which corresponds to a blemish in judgment. This lot fell on the 12th month of the year, the month of Adar, and Haman assumed that this meant since he is nourished by a blemish in judgment, which is a blemish in the binding of the chariot that was blemished by the blemish of Saul, who came from the tribe of Benjamin, who was the last of the tribes, upon whom the binding of the chariot was dependent, and that on account of Saul's blemish, a blemish was also caused in Benjamin, who corresponds to the binding of the chariot. That is why he wanted to overcome the Jewish people in the last of the 12 months. For the 12 months of the year correspond to the 12 tribes, and the year contains 4 seasons that correspond to the 4 flags, which correspond to the binding of the chariot. So he sought to overpower them in the month of Adar, which is the last of the 12 months, since he is nourished from the blemish of the chariot that is blemished through Benjamin, who is the last of the 12 tribes, and upon whom the binding of the chariot is dependent. Section 9. But Mordecai knew everything that had happened, and Mordecai rent his garments, donning sackcloth and ashes. Esther 4:1. Mordecai embodied the rectification of all rectifications, as explained in the lesson. For Mordecai was an authentic teacher with students, since he led an academy of students, and through an authentic teacher with students are all things rectified. Furthermore, the rectification of judgment comes through the authentic teacher by his casting himself into filth and mud for the sake of God's name, putting aside all wisdom which corresponds to sleep, and through this he attains a perception of why a tzaddik suffers while a wicked one has it good, which corresponds to the rectification of judgment, as explained well in the lesson. Study there well. Thus, when Mordecai realized all of the above, that Haman's power comes through a blemish in judgment, he therefore donned sackcloth and ashes, which corresponds to casting himself into filth and mud for God's name, since he cast aside all wisdom and did simple things without any sophistication, going out into the center of the city and crying out bitterly while wearing his sackcloth and ashes. Through this itself, judgment was rectified. For through his casting aside all wisdom and throwing himself into filth and mud for God's name, which corresponds to donning sackcloth and ashes, he thereby attained a perception of a tzaddik suffering, while a wicked one has it good, which is the rectification of judgment. This is, Mordecai knew everything that had happened, for by donning sackcloth and ashes, through that he knew everything that happens in the world, that there is a shocking thing that happens on earth. There are tzaddikim whom are befallen as befits the deeds of the wicked, and wicked who are befallen as befits the deeds of the righteous. Ecclesiastes 8:14, which refers to a tzaddik suffering, while the wicked one has it good. Mordecai knew of all this. As stated, Mordecai knew everything that had happened, which is everything that happens on earth, including a tzaddik suffering, while the wicked one has it good. Even this he was able to know and perceive. This came about by his putting aside all wisdom and casting himself into filth and mud for God's name, as in, he donned sackcloth and ashes. Section 10. Mordecai embodied pure myrrh and freedom corresponds to the Jubilee, which is the 50th year, which corresponds to the 50 gates of understanding, and understanding hovers in the throne, which corresponds to the thrones of judgment. That is why Mordecai was able to rectify the thrones of judgment, for he bound his soul to an extremely exalted level, to the mystery of the manifestation of hidden wisdom, which is manifested during sleep. For specifically during sleep, which is when one puts aside all wisdom, which corresponds to sleep. Then the illumination of Mordechai is revealed, which is the manifestation of hidden wisdom. In other words, the wisdom that is hidden and concealed from every human eye, which is the perception of a tzaddik suffering while a wicked one has it good, was manifested, through which the thrones of judgment were rectified, which is the rectification of judgment study well in the pre-Etz Chaim regarding the Kabbalistic intentions of Purim, as well as in the Rebbe's lesson. Section 11. Now, the wicked Haman sought to overpower Mordechai through the blemish in judgment, the blemishing of the thrones of judgment. So his plan was to prepare a 50-meter-high tree upon which to hang Mordechai. For he sought to blemish the 50 gates of understanding, which correspond to the thrones of judgment, the blemishing of which is his source of nourishment. This is the mystery of the lot that he cast. In understanding, which corresponds to the thrones of judgment, lies the root of the lot, the mystery of the lot. For from there emerges judgment to all creatures on earth, apportioning to each one what they will receive by lot and by judgment. This corresponds to the lot of the high priest on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the mystery of the Jubilee, corresponding to the 50 gates of understanding, when the thrones of judgment are rectified, when the high priest enters into the innermost chamber. Then the high priest casts a lot on the 2 goats, one lot for God and one lot for Azazel, for from there downward does judgment begin to take effect, which is the source of nourishment for the realm of evil, which corresponds to Azazel. So, on Yom Kippur, when the thrones of judgment are rectified, the holy lot, which corresponds to the holy judgment, must also be rectified, which is accomplished mainly by banishing from there all power of the realm of evil and giving it its portion, which is the 1 goat for Azazel. This corresponds to our not wanting to elevate the drop of Esau and Ishmael, which correspond to the realm of evil, the filth of the serpent, into holiness, meaning to the mind, but on the contrary, to banish it to the outside, for we ourselves are giving it its portion, which is the 1 goat for Azazel, so that it will have no hold over us, so that judgment will not be thereby blemished. That is why Haman, who was connected to the blemish of judgment, to the blemish of the lot, on account of Saul's blemish of attempting to elevate the drop of Esau and Ishmael, cast a lot. For he sought to overturn the lot and the judgment against the Jewish people to their detriment through the blemishing of judgment and the lot. So he prepared a tree that was 50 cubit tall, seeking to overpower Mordechai through the blemish of judgment, which corresponds to the Jubilee, to the 50 gates of understanding. For through the blemish of judgment is Amalek empowered. But when through God's compassion the judgment was rectified by Mordechai, and Haman's evil plan boomeranged onto his own head, and he himself was hanged on the tree that he had prepared for Mordechai, for the thrones of judgment, and whatever had been blemished was now rectified. Haman Amalek was thereby uprooted from the root of his power, and hanged on the 50-cubit high tree, for from there itself was he uprooted, and from there he fell into hell. Judgment had been rectified, and Haman Amalek had been banished, which corresponds to his being hanged, in that he was elevated to the top of the 50-cubit high tree, and specifically, from there he was cast down and fell, in order to completely uproot him from holiness, from the 50 gates of understanding that are clothed in the thrones of judgment, from which he had sought to draw nourishment through the blemishing of judgment, corresponding to which he had prepared the 50-cubit high tree. So now that the Jewish people had attained the rectification of judgment, from there itself he had his downfall, for he was uprooted from there and cast down into the depths of hell, which corresponds to his being hanged by being raised to the top of the tree and then being let down to fall from there in order to be uprooted from his root. The lot and the judgment for evil was also overturned against the Amalekites, all through the rectification of judgment, which corresponds to the lot, and then they were uprooted and eradicated specifically through the lot, for the lot was rectified, which corresponds to the rectification of judgment. Section 11. This corresponds to giving gifts to the poor on Purim. Charity corresponds to the rectification of judgment, as in, you did judgment and charity in Jacob, Psalms 99:4. As the Rebbe cites in Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 2 for charity corresponds to judgment, as in, God judges. He lowers this one and raises that one, Psalms 75:8. That is why Haman sought to damage the Jewish people's charity by weighing out 10,000 talents of silver to counter the shekels the Jewish people gave toward the sanctuary and temple, as our sages said Megillah 13b. His entire evil intention was to intensify the blemish of judgment. Thus, when the Jewish people vanquished him and cast him down, they instituted giving gifts to the poor, which is charity, corresponding to the rectification of judgment. That is why charity corresponds to the rectification of the covenant. For the rectification of judgment is the rectification of the covenant. And then bounty flows into the holy Malkut, which corresponds to Shmini Atzeret. This itself corresponds to the charity that we bountifully give to the poor and the needy, who correspond to the feminine, to the holy Malkut that has nothing of its own, which is the ultimate rectification of the covenant. Section 12. This corresponds to the barley omer offering. To the Jews had light, joy, gladness, and splendor. Esther 8:16, which refers to Tiflin Megillah. 16a, to the reading of the Megillah. 2, they fulfilled and they accepted. Esther 9:27. 4, they re-accepted the Torah during the days of Ahasuerus. Shabbat 88a, as in, the Torah was only given in writing. Pesikta Rabati 5, as in, write this as a commemoration in a book. Exodus 17:14-2. There he set for them statute and judgment, and there he tested them. There 15:25, which refers to water, which corresponds to judgment. Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 20. Then Zion will be redeemed with judgment. Isaiah 1:27, as in, he will judge the poor with justice. There 11:4, and then these days of Purim will never pass. Esther 9:28. Thus, that is why they call these days Purim, after the poor, that is, the lot. Esther 9:26. For the essence of the great miracle was that judgment was rectified, which corresponds to the rectification of the lot, as in, one is obligated to drink to intoxication on Purim until one can no longer differentiate between cursed be Haman and blessed be Mordecai. Law 4. Based on the lesson in Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 33. Study there well. In sum, the entire world is filled with his glory. Isaiah 6:3. He fills all worlds and transcends all worlds, and there is no place empty of him. Zohar, Part 3, 2:25a. Even in the deepest depths of the realm of evil, it is possible to find him. When one subdues one's inclination, then when one speaks with non-Jews or sees their behaviors, the evil falls away and is neutralized in their presence, thus manifesting the good that was hidden there, through which one attains the love that is in dot. For there are two types of love. There is love that is contained within days, that corresponds to loving kindness, a day that accompanies all days, and there is love that transcends the days, transcends the attributes, which is the love that is in dot, which corresponds to the Torah of the hidden ancient one that will be manifested in the future. Every individual is able to have a taste of the light of the love that is in dot by binding one's heart to one's dot. Study all this well in the lesson. Study also the lesson in Likutey Moharan, Part 2:12. Section 1. The Torah has warned us not to follow the ways of the idolaters, and to distance ourselves from them as far as possible, and not imitate them as explained in Yoreh Daya, Laws of the Ordinances of the Idolaters. Indeed, although ultimately it is possible to find God even amidst idolatrous culture, for God sustains everything as explained well in the lesson. Nevertheless, one must not enter into there, for one can get trapped there, on account of the many layers of evil that outnumber the good. The good thus becomes completely hidden there, such that one can become trapped among them. But the main warning of the Torah is not to follow their ordinances, as written, "Do not follow in their ordinances." Leviticus 18:3. For God created each thing and its opposite. So just as in holiness there are two types of love, so is it in the realm of evil. In holiness there is love within days, in which there are good days and bad days, as explained in the lesson. And there is the love that is in dot, that transcends the mind and the attributes, in which everything is good, since this corresponds to the Torah of the hidden ancient one that will be revealed in the future, which is entirely good, beyond the attributes, beyond the intellect, beyond. For it is impossible for us to perceive with our intellects the light of this love that is in dot. On the other hand, in the realm of evil, there are also two categories. There are the forces of evil, the realm of evil, which are in the category of days, corresponding to bad days that counter the good days. And in these bad days are many sparks of the good days and attributes that have fallen into them. But there is also a category of evil that is entirely evil and that contains no good at all, no dot at all. It is entirely foolishness and evil, in which there is no good at all, no intelligence at all, no spark of holiness at all. Thus, any actions that come from this category contain no intelligence at all, even actions done only in error. In the evil of days and attributes, one can still find some sparks of holiness, which is why there is some rationale, however mistaken, since though they invert the words of the living God on account of the abundant evil, nevertheless, there is at least some rationale for the mistake and falsehood. However, in the other category of evil, there is no spark at all, no rationale at all, for there is no intelligence in it at all. It is the very root of the realm of evil, and all forces of evil receive from there. This corresponds to the ordinances of the idolaters. An ordinance is a law without any rationale. In holiness, the ordinances of the Holy Torah transcend intelligence and correspond to the love that is in dot that will be revealed in the future, such as the commandment of the red heifer, regarding which is said, "This is an ordinance of the Torah," Numbers 19:2, the mystery of which will only be revealed in the future. And, regarding this mitzvah, King Solomon said, "I said I would become wise, but it is distant from me." Ecclesiastes 7:23. Similarly, in the realm of evil, the ordinances of the nations are in the second category of evil, which is below days and attributes, in which there is no rationale at all. That is why these laws are called ordinances. And we can see for ourselves that their laws lack any rationale at all, since they are in this category, which is their idolatry, which is sheer and obvious foolishness, lacking any rationale at all. Nevertheless, they are religiously attached to it, for this second category of evil is entirely evil, lacking any rationale or spark of holiness. As brought in the Kabbalistic writings, idolatry lacks any spark of holiness and corresponds literally to excrement, which is absolute waste product that lacks any good, as in, leave, tell him, Isaiah 30:22. This corresponds to, for all of the gods of the nations are idols, Psalms 96:5, specifically, idols, which means something that has no inherent existence, as Rashi explains, for they lack any good. That is why they contain no rationale or intelligence, which is why they are called the ordinances of the idolaters. So whoever befriends idolaters and imitates them may become trapped in their net to the point of becoming trapped in this second category of evil, which is the ordinances of the idolaters, which is entirely evil. Thus, when one falls into there is no one to support them, since there are no sparks of holiness there at all. That is why the Torah warns us to avoid their ways and distance ourselves from them. It is all forbidden as the ordinances of the idolaters, meaning so that one will not become trapped in the second category, which is the ordinances of the idolaters, in which there is no good at all. Whoever falls into there will find it difficult to leave, for there is nothing to support them, since there are no sparks there at all, no good at all. Section 2. This corresponds to the great miracle of Purim, which God did for us amazingly with His kindness in those days, doing for us great miracles and wonders, the likes of which had never happened before. The wicked Haman had sought to overpower the Jewish people with the second type of evil force. Making himself into an object of worship and idolatry is in this second category. That is why he sought to annihilate and wipe out the entire Jewish people, for annihilation is in this category, since there is no spark of Jewish holiness there at all, since there is no good in it at all. That is why our sages said, "Why were the Jewish people of that generation condemned to annihilation? Because they prostrated to the idol Megillah." 12a, meaning that when one falls into idolatry, which is the second category, the consequence is utter annihilation, for there is no good in it at all. Thus, there had never before been such a calamity, for no one before had sought to utterly wipe out the Jewish people as the wicked Haman sought to do. Since he was from this category of complete evil, in which there is no Jewish holiness at all, he therefore thought that there would be no way for the Jewish people to save themselves from him, since it is impossible to leave the second category, since there is no support there at all, because there is no good in it at all. However, even though this second category, which is entirely evil and contains no good at all, nevertheless inevitably receives its life force from God, since without Him there is no life at all. It necessarily receives life force from God, since He sustains all things. Yet, as the Rebbe explains in several places, especially in Likutey Halakhot, Part 2, 12, the fiercest forces of evil receive their life force from the highest level of holiness that transcends all other levels of holiness. This level of holiness is utterly hidden and concealed, corresponding to the sealed saying. And specifically, from there, do these greatest levels of evil, corresponding to idolatry, receive their life force. This is because precisely since this holiness is so utterly hidden and concealed, therefore these forces of evil receive their life force specifically from there. Thus, even if one falls into there, and even though it appears that it is absolutely impossible to get out of there, nevertheless, they still receive their life force from God, for God sustains all things. So then, precisely to the contrary, when one is able to return to God and to find Him even there, through this, one becomes able to know that even there is God, albeit utterly hidden. Then the fall itself becomes the greatest ascent, for one thereby attains the most exalted holiness that is hidden there. Study this well in Likutey Halakhot, Part 2, 12. This exalted level of holiness that corresponds to the sealed saying, from where these forces of evil receive their life force, corresponds to the love that is in dot, which transcends the attributes and the days, and which corresponds to the Torah of the Ancient One that will be manifested in the future. That is why the Rebbe writes in the lesson that by finding godliness in the depths of the realm of evil, through this one attains the love that is in dot. For the depths of the realm of evil, which is the second category, corresponding to idolatry and the ordinances of idolaters, receive their life force from the hiddenness of the love that is in dot, which it utterly hidden and concealed receives sustenance from there. Thus, when the tzaddik who subdues his inclination looks into this force of idolatry, he perceives specifically from there the light of the love that is in dot. For this hidden light, from the great hiddenness of which they receive sustenance, has been manifested. And to the tzaddik, who is able to understand this, is revealed that which is hidden and concealed. He then sees and perceives specifically through this the hidden light from which they receive their sustenance. But only a very great and awesome tzaddik is able to ascend and extract from there those who have fallen into there, having broken this force of evil and manifested the exalted light of holiness, the hidden light. This corresponds to the great miracle of Purim. The wicked Haman thought that the Jewish people would not be able to save themselves from him, since he was overpowering them with the second category of evil. But God had compassion on the Jewish people and sent the healing before the wound. In that generation was Mordecai, whose great and exalted power is spoken of in the Kabbalistic writings. He was a very great and awesome light, corresponding to the love that is in Dot, and his name, Mordecai, is numerically equivalent to abundant kindness, 274, which corresponds to the love that is in Dot. For the love that is in days corresponds to kindness, which is a day that accompanies all days, whereas abundant kindness corresponds to the love that is in Dot, which transcends regular kindness, but is abundant kindness. This was Mordecai, and since he was in this category, he therefore had the power to break even Haman Amalek's evil force, which is the second category that has no good at all. For he knew and perceived that even this force receives its sustenance from God, from the sealed saying, which corresponds to the love that is in Dot, in which Mordecai was rooted. And since he had attained this perception that they too receive sustenance from God, from the sealed, saying they were therefore utterly subdued and neutralized, for they are sustained by the hiddenness. So now that it has become known that even there is God hidden, they automatically fall away and dissipate. Then, on the contrary, the ultimate ascent is attained, for we become able to perceive the light of love that is in Dot, which is the hidden light. This is the great miracle of Purim, regarding which is said that on no festival, not even on Shabbat, is there such an amazingly intense illumination as on Purim. Indeed, God did for us an amazing thing, transforming things completely around, as written, things were overturned. Esther 9. One for Haman had sought to overpower with the second category of evil, in which there is no good. And through Mordecai the Tzaddik, everything was literally turned on its head. The light of love that is in Dot, from which these forces of evil receive sustenance, was manifested from within the great hiddenness. And now that the hidden light was manifested, the forces of evil dissolved, for they are sustained only from the hiddenness. This is why the days of Purim will never cease. There, 28 and all of the festivals will cease except for Purim, Yerushalmi Ta'anit 2b. For Purim corresponds to the manifestation of the light of love that is in Dot, that will be manifested in the future. That is why the days of Purim will not cease even in the future, for all of the festivals are a commemoration for the exodus from Egypt. And the exodus from Egypt was that the people left the dominion of Pharaoh, who was the head of all the forces of evil. Yet, nevertheless, he was in the category of the evil connected with the manifestation of days and attributes. Pharaoh is the letters of the nape of the neck, the place from which the mentalities begin to descend and spread throughout the days and attributes. That is where Pharaoh had his power. This is certainly a very strong and harsh force of evil, since its power is literally at the beginning, yet it is close to days and attributes. Haman Amalek, however, is the very root of evil, as in, the first of nations is Amalek, Numbers 24:20. For he draws nourishment from the hiddenness of Dot, from the sealed saying, which is impossible to subdue unless one has attained the light of love that is in Dot, which transcends days and attributes. That is why all of the festivals, which are good days, meaning that in those days God had done with us miracles at the exodus from Egypt and subdued the bad days, so that the good days could overpower. Therefore, these are festivals. But in the future, when the love that is in Dot, which transcends days, will be manifested, therefore all good days, festivals, will cease, for the light that will be manifested in the future transcends days. But Purim, which is in the category of the love that is in Dot, for Haman Amalek, who was nourished from this hiddenness, was subdued at this time. So, therefore, the days of Purim will not cease even in the future, for then we will attain this illumination as well, which is the light of love that is in Dot, which itself is the illumination of Purim. Section 3. This corresponds to the sending of gifts to one another, which corresponds to complete love and unity, in that each one merges with the other. In the love that is in Dot, everything is entirely one, and in that realm, the entire Jewish people are completely one, without any boundary and separation between one another. That is why on Purim we mingle and join with one another, which is the sending of gifts to one another, since everything is entirely one. And the gifting to the poor corresponds to the manifestation of godliness, for the essence of the manifestation of godliness, which corresponds to God's kingship, comes through charity, as in, "With charity I will behold your countenance," Psalms 17:15. Thus, on Purim, when the hidden and sealed light is manifested, we therefore manifest his godliness through charity. For the most important thing is to evoke manifestation, to manifest the hidden godliness to the entire world. So, when on Purim we attain the light of love that is in Dot, which is the hidden light, we must manifest this hiddenness, which is accomplished mainly through charity. Section 4. And when the hidden light is manifested, a new Torah is made, for God and the Torah are one. So, when God is hidden, this corresponds to the hiddenness and concealment of the Torah, and when God is manifested, a new Torah is revealed. This corresponds to the Megillah, from the root of manifestation, for a new Torah has been revealed through the manifestation of the light of love that is in Dot, which corresponds to the Torah of the hidden ancient one, from where our holy Torah is nourished. Thus, the Torah was only given after Amalek had attacked and was subdued, for the essence of the manifestation of the Torah is dependent upon the subdual of Amalek, who corresponds to the force of evil that is nourished from this hiddenness. So, when we subdue them, this hiddenness is uncovered, and we attain Torah, for the entire holy Torah is nourished from the love that is in Dot, which is the Torah of the hidden ancient one. That is why the Jewish people accepted the Torah anew in Ahasuerus's time, for the essence of receiving the Torah is dependent upon the subdual of Haman Amalek. For this reason, there is no mention at all of any holy name, other than allusions in acronyms, for this corresponds to the hidden light, to the hidden Torah that was manifested at that time, which transcends all other holiness. There is still much to say about this. Blessed be God forever. Amen and amen. And immediately after Purim comes the Torah reading of the red heifer. This is the ordinance of the Torah. Understand this. Section 5. Furthermore, one is obligated to drink to intoxication on Purim, to the point that one can no longer differentiate between cursed be Haman and blessed be Mordechai, because at this level beyond Dot, one cannot say, "Cursed be Haman," for at that level everything is good, beyond attributes, beyond good days and bad days. This corresponds to the mystery of the red heifer, which corresponds to an ordinance which is beyond Dot, defiling the pure and purifying the defiled, a mystery which is impossible to understand until the future, when the hidden Torah will be manifested. Section 6. This corresponds to when Moses raised his hand, the Israelites prevailed, and when he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. Exodus 17:11. Were Moses' hands waging the battle? Rather, when the Israelites looked heavenward, they prevailed. Rosh Hashanah 29a. When the force of Amalek prevails, the rectification is to look heavenward, to look toward and understand its root on high, to understand that it receives sustenance from above, from the highest level of holiness. Through that, it is subdued, as said earlier. Section 7. Esther corresponds to hiddenness, which corresponds to the highest level of holiness, which is hidden and concealed. Specifically, this holiness, on account of its exaltedness and great hiddenness, is able to enter into the depths of the realm of evil, for specifically from there does it receive its nourishment. Because it is so hidden, it remains untouched, even though the forces of evil are drawing nourishment from it. This corresponds to Esther's being taken to Ahasuerus and entering into the depths of the realm of evil, of this hiddenness, specifically from which they receive sustenance. That is why indeed Ahasuerus did not touch her, since she was so utterly hidden and concealed, completely untouchable by the forces of evil. Yet they enjoy and derive nourishment from her, for specifically from this hiddenness itself are they nourished. This is the meaning of our sages' teaching, that Esther would lie in Ahasuerus's embrace, immerse herself, and then go to lie in Mordecai's embrace, Megillah 13b, for this holiness, on account of its hiddenness, descends into the depths of the realm of evil, yet is nevertheless untouched by it. And Mordecai alone truly has her, for he has attained this highest level of holiness. Since he has attained the level of Esther, of hiddenness, which corresponds to the hidden light, understand these ideas well. There is still much to say. Section 8. For this reason, work is permitted on Purim, and the laws of the holiness of a festival do not apply in this regard at all. This is because Purim corresponds to an illumination of an extremely exalted holiness, on account of which the holiness is not perceptible at all. This is similar to what the Rebbe writes about all songs being holy, but the Song of Songs is the holy of all holies, though specifically in the entire Song of Songs there are no holy words at all. Likutey Halakhot, Part 1, 243. Study there and understand well. This is because all of the festivals, which correspond to good days, contain many aspects of holiness, such as the sanctification of the festivals by reciting the Kiddush and the refraining from work. They are in the category of good days, in contrast to bad days. So many acts of holiness must be done in them in order to evoke the good days and subdue the bad days. For if any mundane work were to be done on a festival, the bad days would be able to prevail, for they are sustained by weekday work. That is why work is forbidden. But on Purim, when the very root of evil was completely subdued and dissolved, and the hidden light was manifested, the light of love that is in Dot, which transcends the days and the attributes. So it is therefore unnecessary to do any acts of holiness in order to subdue the bad days, so that they do not prevail, for they have no power at all at this time. Thus, even if one does mundane work, evil has no power or sway over it at all, for evil has been completely subdued at its root, such that even if one does mundane work, it has no power at all. For the hidden light has been manifested, the light of love that is in Dot, which transcends time, transcends days and attributes, transcendent all levels of holiness. Law 5. Based on the lesson in Likutey Halakhot, Part 1, 55, study there the entire lesson. In sum, it is impossible to witness the downfall of the wicked other than through the land of Israel, as in, "Sit by my right until I set your enemies as a footstool at your feet." Psalms 110. 1. The right, corresponding to the land of Israel, as in Benjamin, literally son of the right, who was born in the land of Israel. And to evoke the holiness of the land of Israel now in exile, as in, "Even also this, while they are in the land of their enemies, I have not loathed them." Leviticus 26. Then, 44 is achieved through the shining of the light of the merits of the forefathers. For the wicked evoke an evil eye upon their enemies, and one can be spared from this evil eye through advocating in merit of the wicked. For even God advocates in merit of the wicked in order to spare the tzaddik from the evil eye of the wicked. This is because, in order to remove judgment, there must be a manifestation of the hand, as in, "My hand will hold fast unto judgment." Deuteronomy 32, 41. And when God's hand is manifested, this creates a shadow in which the tzaddik is concealed from the poison of the evil eye, as in, I have covered you with the shadow of my hand. Isaiah 51:16. Through this, the eyesight of the tzaddik is strengthened, and he is able to see and perceive God's righteousness, even though the wicked person has been vindicated in judgment. Furthermore, the tzaddik's heart is straightened from crookedness, and he strengthens himself and prays for his needs, since his heart has been straightened with full faith, since the essence of prayer is through faith. This corresponds to the red heifer and to its dust and ashes. The tzaddik must also rectify the three sounds with his prayer, and through proper prayer, the light of the merit of the forefathers shines, as in Chala is the merit of the forefathers. And wherever the forefathers are, is the divine presence, which corresponds to Chala, Zohar, Part 3, 174a. This is even also this, for also this corresponds to Chala, the obligation of which begins from a minimum dough size of 43 egg measures, and this corresponds to the inheritance of the land of Israel. And through the land of Israel, not only is the tzaddik spared from the evil eye of the wicked, but also witnesses happening to them what they wanted to see happen to him. But no, not just anyone is capable of rectifying these sounds with one's prayer, for sometimes these sounds are emitted by such immense wicked people, such as King Og of Bashan, such that even Moses was afraid of him, for his power was near to the right, which is the land of Israel, since he had once helped Abraham. So God told Moses, "Do not fear him." Deuteronomy 3:2, Genesis, Rabbi 42:8. Through this, the tzaddikim who do good are able to behold God. For before the cutting down of the wicked, God's countenance was concealed and covered within the evildoers in order to destroy them. But as soon as they witness the cutting down of the wicked, God's countenance is immediately manifested to the good doers. Study all this there very well. Section 1. This corresponds to Purim. Haman the Amalekite was always a beating strap for the Jewish people, whose evil eye was always toward them. As soon as the Israelites had left Egypt, after the sea had split before them while Pharaoh and his soldiers drowned in it, Amalek's evil eye befell them, and they came to attack them. But God restrains judgment in his hand, and is patient with Amalek for a very long time, battling them specifically through that itself, as in, for a hand is on God's throne, a battle for God with Amalek from generation to generation. Exodus 17:16. For through this itself, God advocating in merit of the wicked, and restraining judgment against the wicked in his hand, is the tzaddik spared, through which the wicked one eventually has his downfall, as explained in the lesson. And this itself is what is explained at the end of the lesson. Initially, God's countenance is concealed by the evildoers in order to cut them down, meaning that God initially conceals his countenance from the tzaddik and elevates the wicked, as in, you behold the evil doing and the rage of the wicked, to repay is in your hands. Psalms 10:14. Hence, God's countenance is concealed within evildoers, through which they attain greatness and honor, for God's countenance is concealed within them. But all this for the purpose of cutting them down, for God does not mete out judgment against a people until it has filled its measure of evildoing. Thus, when God sees that some wicked person whose evil eye is upon a tzaddik, but whose time to be cut down has still not come, God then advocates in their merit and restrains judgment in his hand, specifically thereby sparing the tzaddik. The tzaddik then is thereby strengthened to pray for his needs. But the tzaddik himself also needs to advocate for the wicked one's merit, strengthening himself to pray until he is able to reach the land of Israel, at which time he becomes able to see happen to the wicked one whatever he wants to see happen to him. So God, knowing the hidden things, knew that the time for the final downfall of Amalek had yet to come, since the people had yet to enter the land of Israel. So he restrained judgment in his hand, and did not instruct Moses to completely wipe out Amalek, as Rashi explains there, but only cut off the heads of its warriors, acting upon divine instruction. This corresponds to when Moses raised his hand, the Israelites prevailed, but when he lowered his hand, the Amalekites prevailed, for Moses was waging battle against them with his hand. This explains an otherwise perplexing question. Why did Moses lower his hand and allow Amalek to prevail? However, Moses also knew that the time for their final downfall had not yet come, so he was forced to battle them with his hand, not exacting full judgment against them, but only the necessary bit, restraining in his hand the remainder of judgment that they deserved. Through this itself, we are able to save ourselves from them at this time, until we will be able to reach the land of Israel, when their final downfall will come. This is when Moses raised his hand, and when he lowered his hand. This is, his hands were faith, translated in the Targum as spread out in prayer. For the most important thing is prayer, which corresponds to faith, in that we must strengthen ourselves greatly to pray to God and not to allow any distortions to enter our hearts, and not to question God when we see the success of the wicked. All this is accomplished through the hand, by restraining judgment in the hand. Thus, for a hand is on God's throne, in that God restrained the thrones of judgment in his hand, through which itself a battle for God with Amalek. This is why the Hebrew word for throne is missing a letter Kes, and God's name is also not complete Yah, for the thrones of judgment are not complete at this time, and God's countenance is concealed. That is why God's name is not complete, on account of which itself a battle for God with Amalek. Section 2. This is because Amalek is the all-inclusive totality of the Ayin nations. As written, Amalek is the first of nations, Numbers 24:20, and all nations in general are evil-eyed, in that they constantly cast an evil eye toward the Jewish people, since they are Ayin nations, because their source is the evil Ayin. And Amalek is the totality of the evil eye, since it is the totality of all Ayin nations. And the evil eye is subdued through the land of Israel, which corresponds to Benjamin, which is why Saul, who was a descendant of Benjamin, was instructed to attack and wipe out Amalek. At that time, the Israelites lived in the land of Israel, and it was an appropriate time to annihilate Amalek. But Saul erred and allowed Agag to live. This was because one must reflect deeply into oneself if one has the power to stand up against the wicked and the evil eye, for not everyone is able to do so, especially against Amalek, which is the totality of the evil eye in the world. And sometimes one must specifically advocate in their merit in order to be spared from the evil eye. That was Saul's error, mistakenly advocating in his merit in order to be spared from the evil eye, allowing Agag to live. But he was indeed mistaken in this case, as Samuel the prophet rebuked him. If you are small in your own eyes, you are the leader of the tribes of Israel. 1 Samuel 15:17. That itself was his mistake. He was small in his own eyes and thought that he lacked the power to stand up against him. But in fact, Saul had the power to stand up and completely annihilate them, since he was a descendant of Benjamin, who was born in the land of Israel, and the Israelites were already living on their own land in the land of Israel. So he had the power to completely annihilate them, since Amalek's downfall is achieved through the land of Israel. Section 3. On account of this error, Haman was born. Thus, when the wicked Haman later rose up, it was a very great calamity, the likes of which had never happened before. Since Haman's power was derived from the mistake of King Saul, who was a descendant of the tribe of Benjamin, corresponding to the land of Israel, his power was therefore very great, similar to what the Rebbe writes regarding Og's power deriving from his being close to the land of Israel and among the supporters of Abraham, who also corresponds to the right. Similarly, Haman drew his power from the mistake of Saul, who corresponded to the land of Israel, and all the more from his being an Amalekite, which is the totality of the evil eye. So his evil eye against Mordecai was very great, as well as against the entire Jewish people, whom he sought to completely annihilate. That is why he sought to counter the power of the shekel donated by the Israelites, as written, 10,000 talents of silver eshkol, Esther 3:9, as our sages said, Megillah 13b. But God said, "Wicked one, their shekels have already preceded yours." For the very donation of the shekels was to avert the evil eye upon the census, as Rashi explains. But that was what Haman sought to accomplish with his evil eye, to counter the power of the shekels. The shekels, in fact, correspond to charity, and charity corresponds to a benevolent eye, as in, a benevolent eye will be blessed, for he gave of his bread to the needy, Proverbs 22:9. Since the essence of charity is to have a benevolent eye, to give the needy with a benevolent eye, as written, lest an evil thought arise in your heart, and your eye becomes evil against your needy brother. Open your hand to him. Deuteronomy 15:9-10. Hence, charity is a benevolent eye, in contrast to an evil eye, and that is the shekels, which correspond to charity. Section 4. This took place toward the end of the Babylonian exile, which was ayin, that is, 70 years, corresponding to the evil ayin eye that had overpowered the people and led them to blemish in the land of Israel. For the Babylonian exile of ayin years was caused by a blemish in the land of Israel, as written, "Then the land will make up for its sabbaticals." Leviticus 26:34. This was because the main subdual of the evil ayin eye, which is all of the ayin 70 nations, is through the land of Israel. And since the people had blemished the land of Israel and not observed the fallowing of the land, therefore the evil eye overpowered them, and they had to go into exile for precisely ayin 70 years. That is why Haman sought to overpower them at the end of this exile, at the end of the 70 years, while they were distant from the land of Israel, to overpower them with the evil eye and prevent them from returning to the land of Israel and the temple. For the land of Israel and the temple correspond to a benevolent eye, as written, "The eyes of your God are constantly upon it." Deuteronomy 11:12. And regarding the temple, "My eyes and heart will be there." 1 Kings 9:3. Thus it is said regarding Haman, when Haman saw Mordecai, Esther 5:9 specifically saw, as in, "Whenever I see this Mordecai there," 13 corresponding to the evil eye, for he sought to overpower him with the evil eye. Section 5. For Haman Amalek is the filth of the primordial serpent, as our sages said. Where is Haman alluded to in the Torah? In, "Was it from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from?" Genesis 3:11, Chulin 139b. This is because the root of the evil eye corresponds to the primordial serpent, who was shrewd, casting an evil eye upon Adam and Eve, as Rashi comments on the verse. They were both nude, Adam and his wife, and were not ashamed, and the serpent was the shrewdest of all the beasts. Genesis 2:24. Upon seeing them sexually intimate in public view, it became jealous and seduced them to eat of the tree of knowledge, so that Adam would die and it would take Eve. Prior to Adam's sin, when they were both holy and pure to the utmost level, they were able to be nude in public view and not be ashamed, for they were not afraid or ashamed of any evil eye in the world, since no evil eye had any power over them, because the only reason one should fear the evil eye is to prevent it from casting poison, the evil of the evil eye, into the individual. That is why when one is overpowered by an enemy and their evil eye, one must be entirely good, corresponding to a benevolent eye, even toward the wicked person himself, advocating in their merit, so that one has no evil eye even toward the wicked one's stature. And though this seems unjust, nevertheless, one should advocate in their merit and have faith in God, for God is righteous, and one must not have any complaints against him, since he is righteous and upright. Then one will surely be spared from the evil eye of the wicked person. For the most important thing to protect oneself from is from an evil eye. For the crookedness of the heart, which is the evil in the heart, that rises to one's consciousness as a question against God's conduct of allowing greatness, honor, and wealth to come to the idolaters, the wicked and the opposers of the truth, while the tzaddikim and the upright languish in disgrace and great humiliation in poverty and distress. This thought corresponds to an evil eye, for an evil eye is dependent upon the evil of the heart, since the bands of the eyes are connected to the heart. Avodah Zarah 28b. See Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 54. Hence, the evil of the heart, which is the crookedness of the heart, that causes one to question God, this corresponds to an evil eye. Thus, the most important thing is that one should guard oneself from the effects of the evil eye, so that no thought or question about God's conduct arise in one's mind, but that one have full and simple faith that God is righteous in all his ways. That is why one must advocate in merit of the wicked person in order to be spared from their evil eye. For by advocating in their merit, one becomes able to see God's righteousness, and one's heart is straightened from its crookedness, and one attains faith and prayer, as explained well in the lesson. For that is the most important thing, that one be spared from the effects of the evil eye, because that is the essence of the entire Torah, which corresponds to the eyes of holiness, to a benevolent eye. This corresponds to the beginning of the Torah, which is the first word in the Torah, containing the three colors of the eye and the pupil, as the Rebbe cites in Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 13. Similarly, the Torah concludes with, "Before the eyes of all Israel," for the essence of the entire Torah and all the commandments is to avoid following the foolishness of the evil heart and what one sees with one's eyes, as written, "So that you not veer after your hearts and after your eyes." Numbers 15:39. For the eye sees and the heart then desires, as our sages said, cited by Rashi, for all lusts and fantasies are all a result of what the eye has seen, since the eye sees and the heart desires, all caused by the evil eye. So one must have compassion on oneself and close one's eyes from beholding evil, closing one's eyes from the appearances of this world, avoiding to look at the lusts and futilities of this world, completely setting aside and neutralizing the effects of the evil eye from oneself and from one's environment, and becoming solely a benevolent eye, beholding nothing else but the Torah and service, as written, "Your eyes shall look straight ahead, and your eyelids shall be straight in front of you." Proverbs 4:25. And as written, "Open my eyes, so that I will behold wonders from your Torah." Psalms 119:18. And "My eyes are always toward God." There, 25:15. Section 6. That is why Adam, before the sin, when he was absolutely pure to the ultimate degree, with the evil eye having no hold over him at all, was therefore not afraid or embarrassed at all, while the serpent, which is the root of the evil eye, was jealous of him. And the serpent's main shrewdness was to introduce the evil eye into the couple, seducing them to question God and to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, saying to them, "For God knows that on the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God." Genesis 3:5, which was having an evil eye toward God and questioning him. Ultimately, the serpent succeeded, as in, the woman saw that the tree was good to eat from, and that it was attractive to the eyes. Specifically, she saw, and it was attractive to the eyes, on account of which they ate of it. And the very eating of the tree of good and evil was itself an evil eye, which is the evil in the heart. For holy eating is the category of a benevolent eye, a benevolent heart, as in, he ate, drank, and his heart was in good spirits. Ruth 3:7, which corresponds to a benevolent heart. This is why our sages comment, his heart was in good spirits. This is the blessing after meals. Ruth Rabbah 5:15. which corresponds to a benevolent eye will bless, Proverbs 22:9, as in, Behold, my eyes have been enlightened, for I have tasted a bit of this honey, 1 Samuel 14:29. On the other hand, forbidden eating corresponds to the eating of the tree of good and evil, which invites evil into the heart, which corresponds to the evil eye. Thus, after that, the evil eye became attached to them, such that death, which corresponds to the evil eye, was decreed upon them, as explained in the lesson on the story of Abba Shaul, who claimed that he buried the dead, which is to subdue the evil eye that is called death, since death causes the eyes to close, as written, Enlighten my eyes, lest I sleep to death, prayer before sleep, for ever since Adam's sin, every individual must die and return to the dust in order to completely eradicate the evil eye. That is why they then needed clothing, as written. The eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized that they were nude. So they took fig leaves and sewed for themselves loincloths. God made for them garments of leather. Initially, they wore garments of light, for their eyes were shining, corresponding to a benevolent eye, and the evil eye had no power over them at all, which is why they did not need then any garment or covering at all. But after their eyes were opened, and the evil eye overpowered them, therefore they needed garments and coverings to conceal themselves, so that the evil eye would not control them. This corresponds to the garments that we must now wear, so that the eyes, which now embody the power of the evil eye from the filth of the serpent, will not take control. So we need garments and coverings to cover and conceal ourselves from the evil eye, so that it does not control us. Section 7. This corresponds to the tzitzit that are dependent upon garments and which are the totality of the entire Torah, as written, so that you remember and observe all of my commandments. Numbers 15:40. Tzitzit are the rectification of garments and rectify the evil eye, as well as stated there, you will see it and remember, for tzitzit means to look with the eyes, as in, he peeks through the cracks. Song of Songs 2:9. See Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 7. This is because the rectification of garments, which is the tzitzit, is the rectification of the eyes. So immediately upon awakening from sleep in the morning, the first obligation is to take the tzitzit and put them on right away. For as soon as one awakens from sleep and opens one's eyes, one must immediately guard them, so that the evil eye does not take control of them. That is why we put on the tzitzit, the very first thing, for they correspond to holy eyes, to a benevolent eye, to holy garments that protect a person from the evil eye, as in, a covering for the eyes, Genesis 20:16. For the garments cover a person from the evil eye, so that it does not take control of them. That is why our sages urged us strongly regarding dressing chastely, covering oneself with one's garments, and never exposing one's nakedness, even when getting undressed. Orach Chaim 2, as Rabbi Yossi said, the walls of my house never saw the seams of my garments. Shabbat 118b. For now one must guard oneself meticulously from the evil eye, and garments are a protection for this. Section 8. Thus, the wicked Haman, who was the filth of the serpent, corresponding to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, as in, was it from the tree? Genesis 3:11 therefore had an extremely powerful evil eye against Mordechai and the entire Jewish people, for that is the essence of the filth of the serpent. This is why it was advised to bring the wicked Vashti before the king naked, something which had never been done before in the world, in order to intensify the evil eye in the world. For the essence of the evil ayin eye is in sexual lust, which is the all-inclusive lust of the ayin 70 nations who correspond to the evil eye. This is because the 70 nations correspond to the evil eye, and all lusts, which all come from the 70 nations, all correspond to the evil eye, for the eye sees and the heart desires. And sexual lust is the all-inclusive lust of the 70 nations, as the Rebbe writes in Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 36. So, this lust is the essence of the evil eye. Since this lust is dependent upon the eyes, as written, lest you veer after your hearts and after your eyes, after which you tend to stray, Numbers 15:39, and one who closes their eyes from seeing evil, Isaiah 33:15, upon which our sages comment, this means not looking at women, Bava Batra 57b. Thus, the essence of chastity and closing the eyes is regarding this lust, and even during holy conjugation, one must conduct oneself with very great chastity. Furthermore, the covering of garments is mainly for chastity regarding this lust, and they wanted to cast off embarrassment from their eyes and to bring the queen naked before them, so that the evil eye would intensify even more. But God confounded their evil plans and brought salvation specifically through that, for specifically on account of their evil eyes, they became jealous of each other, such that Haman himself, who embodied the evil eye, became jealous of Vashti's status and advised that she be put to death. So it was that his evil eye, which was against everyone, as is its nature, killed the very epitome of the evil eye, which was the wicked Vashti, since she corresponded to the evil kingdom, which corresponds to sexual lust, which corresponds to the evil eye. That is why she would strip Jewish girls naked and force them to work on Shabbat. For Shabbat corresponds to the benevolent eye, as in the three colors of the eye and the pupil of the eye. That is why our sages said, a large gate diminishes one's eyesight, but it is regained upon reciting the Kiddush on Friday night, Brachot 43b. This is because Shabbat is the rectification of the eyes, as in, a benevolent eye will bless, for it contains the blessing, as in, God blessed and sanctified it, Genesis 2:3. This is why the holy conjugation is on Shabbat, for then it is in holiness, without any attachment of the evil eye at all. But the wicked Vashti sought to intensify the evil eye, so she forced the Jewish girls to work on Shabbat naked. That is why her downfall came through the evil eye itself, through Haman and Ahasuerus, who sought to intensify the evil eye by bringing her out naked on Shabbat. But she too had lewd intentions and great desires, for she herself also embodied the intensification of the evil eye. But God confounded the plans of the shrewd naked ones and caused a conflict between one evil eye and the other, so that they would become jealous of each other and kill each other, so that the salvation would come specifically through that. Thus, Vashti was killed specifically by the evil eye. Section 9. In place of the nettles will rise a myrtle, Isaiah 55:13, which refers to Esther Megillah 10b, who was very chaste, as our sages said. On account of Rachel's chastity, she had the privilege to be the forebearer of Saul, who was very shy, and on account of Saul's chastity, he had the privilege of being the forebearer of Esther there, 13b. This is because chastity is the opposite of the evil eye. So all these were very chaste in order to subdue the evil eye, and specifically all those born from Benjamin, who was born in the land of Israel, specifically through whom comes the main power to subdue the evil eye. Section 10. Now the subdual of the evil eye comes mainly through God's advocating in merit of the wicked, through which the tzaddik is spared, through which the eyesight of the tzaddik is greatly strengthened, and he is able to pray. Thus, before Haman's downfall, he was very greatly elevated, which was his very downfall. For as long as his evil had not yet reached its zenith, God was advocating in his merit and dismissing his case from judgment, and was in fact elevating and enhancing him greatly. This corresponds to, after these things, the king promoted Haman and elevated him, setting his throne. Esther 3:1. This promotion corresponds to God's advocating in merit of the wicked, specifically through which the tzaddik is spared. This corresponds to, the king removed his ring from his hand and gave it to Haman there. 10. Everything has a root on high, and the removal of the king's ring from his hand alludes to the removal of the royal ring, from the supernal hand, for God, so to speak, restrained judgment from Haman with his hand, and in fact gave him extreme greatness with his hand, as in, for you see evil and spite, to give is in your hand. Psalms 10:14, such that God's countenance becomes hidden within the evildoers, in this case, Haman. Then, while God's countenance is hidden within them, they enjoy all the greatness and glory. This corresponds to the transfer of the ring from the king's hand to Haman, for the ring is the king's seal, with which all of the king's judgments are signed by him. As stated throughout the book of Esther, that all royal edicts are enacted through the ring. During this time, God removes judgment from the evildoer, and not only that, but conceals his countenance and judgment within him, handing judgment into his hands, as one being vindicated in judgment, as if all judgment was in his hands. And God's countenance is concealed within the evildoer, because God's countenance corresponds to the judgment that emerges from the countenance, as we recite, "May our judgment emerge from before you." Psalms 17:2. And as written, "I will set my countenance upon that man." Leviticus 20:5, and other such verses. And while God is advocating in merit of the wicked one, he stretches out his hand upon him and conceals the countenance and judgment, as in, God's countenance is upon evildoers. Psalms 34:17. Then they receive all greatness and glory and are vindicated in judgment, as if they are the ultimate judge, which corresponds to the removal of the king's seal ring, which is the king's judgments that are then given to Haman, for now all judgment is hidden with them in exile. Thus, even in holiness, when one wants to achieve some law and edict for the perpetuation of our holy faith, one must work specifically with their forces, as the Rebbe writes in Likutey Halakhot, Part 1. 20. For God's countenance, which is judgment, is hidden in them. Section 11. This concealment of God's countenance in evildoers, which itself later becomes their downfall, as in, God's countenance is upon evildoers to annihilate them. Psalms 34:17 corresponds to Esther, who was taken to the palace of King Ahasuerus. For Esther corresponds to concealment, as our sages said. Where is Esther alluded to in the Torah? In, "I will utterly hide my countenance from them," Deuteronomy 31:18, Chulin 139b. This is because Esther was beautiful and good-looking. Esther 2:7. Since a thread of charm was drawn upon her Megillah. 13a. The beauty and charm from the divine face of the 370 lights of the light of the supernal countenance were drawn upon her. Hence, Esther corresponds to the supernal countenance that is greatly hidden and concealed. So greatly is the holiness hidden that the righteous Esther was taken to the palace of King Ahasuerus. This corresponds to God's countenance is upon evildoers to annihilate them, in that Esther, who corresponds to the concealment of God's countenance in evildoers, through which Haman and his descendants, who embodied the evil eye, were annihilated. Thus, specifically after Esther was taken to the king's palace, there was then Haman elevated, as written, "After these events, the king promoted Haman and elevated him." Esther 3:1-4. Specifically then, when God's countenance is hidden in evildoers, then they receive all greatness specifically through God's countenance that is concealed in them, which corresponds to Esther's being taken among them. Afterward, specifically through this, they have their downfall, as in, God's countenance is upon evildoers to annihilate them, as explained in the lesson. But the most important thing then is prayer, for during a time of concealment, when the evil eye is intensified and God's countenance is concealed in them, the Jewish people were indeed in very great danger. The evil eye, which is Haman, had greatly overpowered them, especially since they had sinned in Babylon by taking foreign women, which is a blemish in this lust, which is the essence of the evil eye, as well as by enjoying the wicked king's banquet, which is a blemish in eating, corresponding to the blemish of eating of the tree of knowledge, on account of which the evil of the heart, which corresponds to the evil eye, became empowered. That is why Haman's power was so very great. But God sent us at this time Mordecai and Esther, and Mordecai eventually became empowered, specifically from the great concealment of Esther's being taken to the king's palace, which corresponds to the concealment of God's countenance, from which the wicked Haman's power was drawn. Mordecai was empowered specifically from that, for this corresponds to the shadow that is made by God's extending his hand to advocate in merit of the wicked and elevate him in order to then cast him down, specifically through which the eyesight of the tzaddik is strengthened and is able to see to the far distance. And then he prays to God. This corresponds to Mordecai's noticing and seeing what was happening and having faith in God that surely it was not for no reason that Esther was taken to the Gentiles' palace. He had faith that this was surely for the Jewish people's salvation, as Rashi explains Esther 2:11, meaning that he understood through the concealment itself of Esther's being taken that God's judgments are surely righteous and upright. This gave him the courage to pray to God, even as Haman's power continued to increase. Not only did he not question God, but on the contrary, strengthened himself even more. He prayed profusely, begging and crying out to God. As written, he went out in the midst of the city and cried out a great and bitter cry. There, 4:1, and the Jewish people joined him and cried out, praying, beseeching, and entreating God. And since the essence of prayer is to arouse the merit of the forefathers, through which we attain the land of Israel, as explained in the lesson, therefore a 3-day fast was decreed, corresponding to the 3 forefathers, for they accompanied Esther whenever she came before the king. Thus, on the 3rd day, Esther donned royalty. There, 5:1, meaning she donned the Holy Spirit, as in, wherever the forefathers are present, the divine presence is there. Zohar, Part 1, 174a. So on the 3rd day, corresponding to the 3 forefathers who were aroused through their prayers and cries for Elijah, had gone to arouse them. Esther, Rabbah, 7:13. Through this, Esther donned royalty, which refers to the divine presence, as in, wherever the forefathers are present, the divine presence is there, which is in the land of Israel, which corresponds to Chala, to the merits of the forefathers. Through their evoking the land of Israel, through the 3 forefathers, through their prayers, and the prayer of Mordecai, whose prayer was the ultimately perfect prayer. As explained in the lesson, through this, not only was the wicked Haman unable to witness done to Mordecai what he foresaw doing with his evil eye, but just the opposite. Mordecai witnessed done to the wicked Haman what Haman had wanted to do to him, and Haman was hanged on the tree that he had prepared for Mordecai. All this as explained in the lesson, that through the above, the tzaddik is able to witness done to the wicked person what the wicked person had wanted to witness done to him. All this happened during the times of Mordecai and Esther, who through their great prayers were able to witness done to Haman what he had wanted to see done to Mordecai. Section 12. This corresponds to Esther's inviting Haman to her banquet, for as our sages said, this corresponds to, if your enemy is hungry, feed him bread, for you are thereby shoveling coals on his head. Proverbs 25:21. Megillah 15b. Esther corresponds to the concealment of God's countenance in evildoers in order to annihilate them, on account of which they initially have all greatness, as said, which corresponds to the greatness and elevation that Haman was given specifically after Esther was taken to the palace. Thus, God's countenance became so concealed such that Esther invited Haman, meaning that God's concealed countenance elevated him even more greatly. And specifically then, at the zenith of his elevation, brought about through the great concealment of God's countenance, which corresponds to Esther. Specifically then, he had his downfall, as in, God's countenance is upon evildoers to annihilate them. All this came about through the greatness of proper prayer. When Esther had invited Haman to the banquet, the hearts of the Jewish people became extremely broken, and they poured out their hearts as water before God. In other words, during the thick of the concealment, one must make greatest effort to pray and cry out to God, and through that, one will be spared from the evil eye, such that they were able to witness happen to Haman what he had wanted to witness happen to Mordecai. Section 13. This corresponds to, on that night, the king's sleep eluded him. Esther 6:1. Sleep comes from the evil eye, which corresponds to death, for sleep is 1/60th of death. That is why we pray before sleep, enlighten my eyes, lest I sleep to death. Hide me in the shadow of your wings. I entrust my spirit into your hand. For we are spared from the evil eye through the hand, through the shadow of the hand, as in, I have covered you in the shadow of my hand. This is why Haman said, there are a people, Esther 3:8, upon which our sages comment, they are asleep from the commandments. Megillah 13b. For the sleep that comes from the evil eye had overpowered them. Thus, the miracle came about through the eluding of sleep, which corresponds to the subdual of the evil eye. Section 14. That is why immediately upon waking from sleep, we don the tzitzit and tefillin, which correspond to the rectification of the eyes. The tzitzit correspond to eyes of holiness, and the tefillin are a sign between your eyes. Exodus 13:16. This corresponds to Mordecai went out from before the king in royal garments of blue and white. Esther 8:15, which corresponds to the profusion of garments and coverings of holiness that counter the evil eye. For the subdual of the evil eye is achieved through garments of holiness that cover the human being. That is why the Jewish people attained the tzitzit and tefillin at that time. As our sages said on the verse, glory refers to tefillin, Megillah 16b, for they correspond to garments of holiness that subdue the evil eye, as in, it is his only covering. This refers to tzitzit. It is the garment for his skin. This refers to tefillin, Exodus 22:26, Tikkune, Zohar 100b. This corresponds to rejoicing refers to circumcision, Megillah 16b. The foreskin corresponds to the clouds that cover the eyes, which corresponds to the evil eye, to a blemish in the covenant, which is the essence of the evil eye. And through the removal of the foreskin and the tearing of the skin, the glans, which is the pupil of the eye, is revealed. Then, through the mitzvah of circumcision, which corresponds to the rectification of the covenant, a benevolent eye is manifested, as in, a benevolent eye will bless Psalms 22:9-4. There God sent his blessing, Psalms 133:3. This corresponds to Joseph the Tzaddik withstanding his temptation and guarding the covenant, through which he was spared from the evil eye. Joseph corresponds to a benevolent eye, as in, he is a charming son to the eye. Genesis 49:22, which our sages read as, removed from the evil eye, Brachot 20a, for the essence of a benevolent eye comes through the guarding of the covenant. Thus, the Jewish people had light, Esther 8:16, specifically light, corresponding to the light of the eyes, to a benevolent eye. And thus, light is Torah, Megillah 16b. For the entirety of the Torah corresponds to a benevolent eye, as in the beginning of the Torah, as said above, as in, open our eyes in your Torah. Section 15. This corresponds to, they lay not a hand in the spoil, Esther 9:10, upon which Rashi comments, lest the king have an evil eye on this. In other words, they showed that now they are in the category of a benevolent eye and have no lust for money at all, which is the evil eye, with which every individual is jealous of the other's money. But they had detached themselves from this lust and had no evil eye for money at all, not even looking at the money of the spoils, for through Mordecai they had attained a benevolent eye. That is how they subdued the evil eye, such that the king would not be able to have an evil eye against them, for they had subdued the evil eye. Section 16. This corresponds to sending gifts of food, each one to their friend, and gifts to the needy. Esther 9:22. For we must give charity, which corresponds to a benevolent eye will bless, for he has given of his bread to the needy. Psalms 22:9. That is why on Purim, whoever stretches out a hand, we must give them, for there is now no evil eye at all, but only a benevolent eye that gives bountifully to anyone who asks. This is also the reason for giving gifts to one's friends, to show how greatly the benevolent eye has spread, such that every individual has a benevolent eye toward their friend, and each one sends gifts to the other, all of which corresponds to a benevolent eye, in that each one has a benevolent eye toward the other. Section 17. This corresponds to the Purim meal. Now that we have subdued the evil eye and attained a benevolent eye, eating is now therefore with holiness, as in, he ate, drank, and his heart was in good spirits. Ruth 3:7, which corresponds to the eating on Shabbat, when it is a great mitzvah to eat the 3 meals that correspond to the 3 forefathers. For now on Shabbat there is a benevolent eye. Thus, the 3 forefathers now shine, for they correspond to a benevolent eye, for through them we subdue the evil eye. That is why it is a great mitzvah to eat on Shabbat. As written, Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is Shabbat." See Exodus 16:25. Specifically, see, for on Shabbat the eyes shine, as in, see that God has given you the Shabbat, on account of which it is a mitzvah to eat, as in, eat it today, for now eating is with holiness. Section 18. That is why on Purim we attain such a very great manifestation as brought in the Kabbalistic writings, for now that the evildoers have been cut down, specifically Haman and his descendants, now God's countenance is manifested to the doers of good, as explained in the lesson. This corresponds to a great illumination, corresponding to the illumination of Mordecai that is manifested now in a way that happens at no other time. Since they were able to then extensively cut down the evildoers, Haman and his descendants, and his entire family through this, God's countenance was manifested greatly, as explained in the lesson which corresponds to the great illumination and manifestation of Purim. This corresponds to the joy of Purim, as in, the Jewish people had light, mirth, and joy. Esther 8:16. For the greatest joy comes through the manifestation of God's countenance, as in, a satiation of joy in your countenance. Psalms 16:11. And since on Purim, through the cutting down of the evildoers, there was a great manifestation of God's countenance, therefore the joy is that much greater. Section 19. That is why the mitzvah of Sukkah protects from Amalek Zohar, Part 3, 103a, for the Sukkah is the clouds of glory Sukkah, 11b, that protect from Amalek, who only attacked those whom the cloud had expelled. Midrash, Tanchuma, Teitzai, 10 for the Sukkah, corresponds to the shadow of the hand, as in, I have covered you in the shadow of my hand. Thus, we offer 70 oxen on Sukkot for the 70 nations, which corresponds to advocating in their merit, so that they will survive until God's word will be meted out. And through advocating for the evil eye, the 70 nations, and offering 70 oxen for them, through this is the shadow of the hand extended, through which we are spared from the evil eye, as in, I have covered you in the shadow of my hand. This itself is the Sukkah. It corresponds to, I have covered you in the shadow of my hand, which is brought about by our advocating in their merit and bringing offerings on their behalf. This Sukkah is thus itself the shadow of God's hand and protects from Amalek, who is the totality of the evil eye. For through the shadow of the hand that comes from advocating in the merit of the evildoers, which corresponds to the sukkah that is made by the 70 oxen offered on their behalf, through this we are spared from the evil eye of the wicked. Section 20. This corresponds to the smoke that arose from all of the offerings and that nourished the forces of evil. Similarly, we too must give some token portion from everything, such as the water of the washing of the hands after meals. For we must advocate in their merit and give them some very minimal nourishment through which we are spared from their evil eye, so that it does not overpower us, as in, I have covered you in the shadow of my hand. Section 21. Thus, the Torah reading on the Shabbat after Purim is the red heifer, for Mordecai's prayer before God when Haman was at the zenith of his power corresponded to the red heifer, as explained well in the lesson for proper prayer corresponds to the red heifer. That is why we now read the section of the red heifer, for the red heifer is attained through Mordecai's prayer, through which he was able to witness happen to Haman what Haman wanted to witness happen to him. And the people were then allowed to return to the land of Israel and rebuild the temple through the decree of Darius son of Ahasuerus. For Mordecai and Esther, descendants of Benjamin, had first been able to evoke and manifest the land of Israel through their great prayers, such that the people were then able to return to the land and construct the temple, which correspond to a benevolent eye. Section 22. This corresponds to the prohibition of eating meat that has been left around without visual supervision, Chulin 95a. The eating of a Jewish person is holy and must be in the category of a benevolent eye will bless, for the ultimate benevolent eye is attained through eating, as said above. Thus, an animal that has died naturally is nothing more than a carcass and is forbidden to eat, for death corresponds to an evil eye. That is why the live animal must be rectified through proper slaughter, through which the evil eye, corresponding to death, is subdued, as in, God's countenance is upon evildoers to annihilate them, Psalms 34:17. In other words, the knife which corresponds to a sword that avenges the vengeance of the covenant, Leviticus 20:25, as in, God's sword, Judges 7:20, corresponds to God's countenance, which corresponds to the Malkut of holiness, as in the light of the king's countenance is life, Proverbs 16:15, which corresponds to God's countenance, which corresponds to the judgment of the Malkut, which corresponds to God's sword, which corresponds to the slaughter knife, which corresponds to the land of Israel, which itself corresponds to the Malkut, for through all this is the evil eye subdued. Only specifically then is meat permissible to eat, for the eating of a Jewish person must be in the category of the holiness of the land of Israel, through which the evil eye is subdued. That is why we are instructed to bless after meals and mention the land of Israel in the blessing, as written, "You shall eat, be satiated, and bless your God over the good land," Deuteronomy 8:10. All blessings preceding enjoyment are derived from this verse, for the essence of a blessing, which corresponds to the land of Israel, which corresponds to a benevolent eye will bless, is in order to evoke the benevolent eye from the land of Israel, in order to subdue the evil eye, so that it does not become attached to the food. Section 23. This corresponds to the ritual preparation of meat for eating slaughter, checking the lungs, washing, and salting it well to extract the blood so that none of it remains. As stated in the lesson, during prayer we must subdue the three sounds, which correspond to the slaughter, burning, and gathering of the red heifer. The first corresponds to the slaughter of all animals, which corresponds to the subdual of the voice of the fool, which is false faiths, which corresponds to animality, which corresponds to a lack of intelligence. Then, through the checking of the lungs, we subdue the voice of blasphemy, specifically that of the heresy of philosophical wisdom, for intelligence is sustained by the lungs, since the lungs cool the heat of the heart. For as explained in the lesson, this evil wisdom is very detrimental to the lechers and those who study philosophical wisdom. It is very, very harmful to them, for their hearts are lacking, as in, he who fornicates with a woman is lacking a heart. Proverbs 6:32. Thus, their hearts are unable to contain intelligence, as in, I have stored your sayings in my heart. Psalms 119:11. And the lungs protect the heart from the heat of sexual lust, for the lungs blow upon the heart and cool its heat, so that it does not become overheated by this lust. That is why intelligence is sustained mainly by the lungs, for intelligence is sustained mainly by guarding from this lust. Then, when the heat of the heart is cooled from this lust by the lungs, intelligence is then guarded, and then the heart is able to store intelligence without sinning on account of the intelligence. But on the contrary, one becomes strengthened to serve God through the holy intelligence. Hence, when the lungs are in a state of perfection, the holy intelligence is perfected and heresy is subdued, which corresponds to the second sound, which is the voice of shouting. This is the checking of the lungs. The third sound corresponds to the voice of scorning, which is all the disgrace that one suffers from one's enemies. This is subdued by distancing ourselves from blood, by separating out the blood from the meat, by soaking and salting. Through this are all disgraces, which correspond to bloodshed and disgrace, subdued, through which we are able to distance ourselves from the blood, and thereby subdue and ameliorate all disgrace and bloodshed, and thereby subdue the third sound. All this is accomplished through the slaughtering knife, which is the ultimate tool of rectification, since it corresponds to God's sword, as said, which corresponds to praises of God in their throats and a multi-edged sword in their hands. Psalms 149:6. Since the ultimate rectification is through prayer, as explained in the lesson. Then, when we have been able to subdue the evil eye through ritual slaughter, the meat is then permissible to eat, for the rectification of food is mainly through the benevolent eye, as said. Thus, the meat must be carefully guarded and close attention paid to it, so that no non-Jewish eye gains control over it, which corresponds to an evil eye. For they are suspected of exchanging the meat and damaging Jewish food, since they correspond to the evil eye, which is the main cause of the damage of food. That is why we must avoid meat that has become hidden from the eye, from Jewish eyes, for Jewish eyes in general correspond to a benevolent eye. And that is why our sages urged us to give a portion of one's food to the poor, so that it will be in the category of a benevolent eye, which is the main rectification of food. Law 6. Based upon the lesson in Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 59, on the verse, I will give them in my house and in my walls a hand and a name, Isaiah 56. 5. Regarding wealth, coming specifically through the subdual of anger, for anger damages the wall of wealth. See also Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 68 and 69, regarding the severe prohibition of anger and robbery. Section 1. This is the great miracle of Purim, which is the downfall of Haman Amalek. Otherwise, it seems strange that we see several wealthy people who are angry people, yet they have great wealth, especially Gentiles, who possess so much wealth, yet are filled with anger and murder. However, authentic wealth is holy wealth, which is the enhancement of one's name and of the holy soul, as explained in the lesson how the enhancement of one's name and of the soul is attained through wealth. On account of this, all souls yearn to be rooted in this name, through which one is able to bring many souls back to God and to construct the holy sanctuary in its place. Wealth like this is impossible to attain other than through subduing anger, and this type of wealth is indeed the ultimate type of wealth. All other wealth, silver, gold, precious stones, and so forth, in the world are rooted in it, in the root of Jewish souls and holy names. For all bounty and wealth in the world come only as All Jewish people are princes, Shabbat 111a, and certainly all wealth belongs to princes. This is why the Rebbe stresses that all Jewish people should rightfully be wealthy, only that anger damages this Likutey Moharan, Part 168. Certainly all wealth should come only to the Jewish people. For every Jewish person, according to the root of their soul, which is their name, which is rooted in God's name, which is the root of all bounty and wealth, should thus rightly have material wealth as well. For every Jewish person, from the greatest to the least, must endeavor to construct the holy sanctuary, which is to bring souls close to God, for which reason one was created. And this is accomplished through the enhancement of the name and the soul, which is attained through wealth, which is the root of the souls, as said. But due to our many sins, this negative trait of anger is so overpowering that the wealth is lost, on account of which one rips apart one's soul, one's name, with one's anger. Job 18:4, which is the destruction of our temple and the exile of our glory. For the destruction was caused mainly by the anger that spread among the people to the point that a great dispute broke out, causing hatred and bloodshed, on account of which our temple was destroyed. And the essence of the destruction was in the withholding of all bounty from the Jewish people, which is all the wealth that was taken from them and given to the Gentiles, which is the essence of the exile, as in, these are the names of the Israelites who entered into Egypt, Exodus 1 specifically the names, which are the souls that are rooted in wealth, for they all descended into exile in Egypt, which embodies all of the exiles that are named after Egypt. This is why all of the enemies who exiled the Jewish people made it their evil goal to destroy specifically the temple, for all Jewish wealth was in the temple. Since the temple itself was constructed with an enormous amount of wealth, besides the actual treasures that were kept in it, this is because the very root of our souls is in the temple. So therefore there was a huge fortune there, since the root of souls is in wealth. Thus the enemy's main goal was the temple and its treasures, as well as the royal palace, for they were mainly after Jewish wealth, which contained the root of Jewish souls. Jeremiah thus wailed, "Our inheritance has been delivered to foreigners." Lamentations 5:2, meaning that Jewish wealth was handed over to them. But God confounds the nations and destroys them. Job 23:12, since the wealth does not remain in their possession, for it comes from thin air and disappears in darkness. Ecclesiastes 6:4, since deceit will not provide the pleasure of its catch. Proverbs 12:27. The only reason that the Gentiles and the wicked possess wealth, even though they are very filled with anger and murder, is because they attack the Jewish people and instill anger into them. The Gentiles are nourished entirely by Esau, the ancestor of Amalek, who is the first of nations, and Esau is in charge of anger, for he is the SM, the inciter who attacks every Jewish soul when he sees that money and wealth are coming their way. So he incites them and instills anger into them, through which they lose their wealth, which is transformed into anger. And from that bounty that was ready to descend to this person in the form of wealth, even though it has been spoiled and transformed into anger, nevertheless, from the dregs of that bounty, which is the dregs of gold, Zohar, Part 1:128, comes wealth to the forces of evil, to the Gentiles and the wicked who are nourished from those dregs. This wealth is the opposite of holiness, for the wealth causes God's name to become concealed and the names of foreign forces to be enhanced. That is how the Gentiles and the wicked are able to attain wealth, even though they are very angry, since all of their wealth corresponds to the dregs that come about through Jewish anger. But the truth is that all of their wealth is not theirs at all, but is only considered as stolen in their possession. For all wealth comes essentially from Jewish souls, only that they incited and instilled the Jewish people with anger, causing damage to the wealth and transforming it into anger. And from those dregs of wealth, they receive their wealth. Thus, they receive their wealth specifically through anger, which is the very source of their wealth. This can be compared to a robber who confiscates another's money and wealth. And this is literally the same, for through their anger, they overpower and grab Jewish wealth by inciting and instilling them with anger. That is why all wealth of the Gentiles and the wicked is not their wealth at all, since it is filled with anger, as written, all his days are anger. Ecclesiastes 2:23, and much anger and illness. Ecclesiastes 5:16. This is because wealth is kept for its owner to his own evil. Ecclesiastes 5:12, which is anger, which is called evil, as the Rebbe explains in the lesson. But it will not remain in their possession, for ultimately it will be returned to its original owner, to the one whose wealth is his from his own root. As written, it will not be stored or stockpiled, for it will be for those who sit before God. Isaiah 23:18. And in place of brass, I will bring gold. Isaiah 67. This is, one who attains wealth unjustly will lose it in the middle of his days. Jeremiah 17:11. Section 2. This was Haman Amalek's mistake. He planned to overcome the Jewish people specifically through his anger. As written, Haman became filled with anger. Esther 3:5. Upon seeing that the Jewish people had been exiled for many years and that all wealth was now in the nation's possession. So he harassed them intensely, especially when they wanted to rebuild the temple and restore wealth to holiness. And his sons, in fact, gave an edict to cancel the reconstruction of the temple. Haman thought he would be able to evoke wealth through anger, seeing that he possessed such great wealth. As written, Haman told them about the glory of his wealth and his many sons. Esther 5:11, who were the sons and souls who were dependent upon his wealth. And yet he is filled with anger, so he thought he would be able to overcome the Jewish people specifically through his wealth. As written, I will weigh 1,000 talents of silver. Esther 3:9. This is why the holy book of Esther begins by telling about the enormous wealth of the evil kingdom of Ahasuerus, as written, showing the wealth of the glory of his kingdom. Linens of white, green, and blue, sofas of gold and silver on floors of green and white stone. Esther 1:4-6 wealth that was unheard of. All this for the purpose of telling and revealing to us the amazing miracle of Purim, for the main power of the evil kingdom then came through its exorbitant wealth. This corresponds to vessels of various sorts. There, 7, which our sages say refers to their using the temple vessels. Megillah 12, a thinking that through them they would be able to overcome the Jewish people by subduing the root of the Jewish people's holy wealth, which is the temple vessels, since the essence of Jewish wealth is the temple and its vessels. Section 3. Indeed, it was a time of unprecedented great distress. Haman sought to annihilate the entire Jewish people, for the root of their souls is in wealth. And since he saw that wealth is now in the nation's possession, he thought that he possesses power over all Jewish souls to annihilate them. So indeed, it was a time of very great danger for the Jewish people. But a boor cannot know, and a fool cannot understand when the wicked flourish. Psalms 92:7. For God confounds the plans of the cunning. The entire power of the realm of evil, embodied by Haman Amalek, is through their great evil anger. So God causes them to fight one another, as in, I will incite Egypt against Egypt, Isaiah 19:2, as written, nation will be embattled with nation. 2 Chronicles 15:6, raising them up one against the other. In his compassion, God causes one angry Jewish enemy to be attacked by another, even more angry one, such that specifically, through the anger, will come their irreversible downfall. This is what happened to Haman. His entire power came from his anger. What did God do? He arranged things that caused Ahasuerus to become enraged at him. As written, the king arose in his rage. Esther 7:7. And evil was decreed against him, and he was hanged on the very tree that he had prepared for Mordecai, and only then was the king's rage assuaged. Section 4. Haman thought that with his anger he would be able to overcome anything, just as he had seen that he had overcome Vashti by causing Ahasuerus to become angry at her. As written, his anger raged in him, Esther 1:12, such that he put her to death upon Haman's advice. Haman thus thought that in the same way he would succeed to annihilate the Jewish people with his anger. But a boor cannot know that God is always with the Jewish people, and he has promised them that even when they are amongst the nations, I will not despise them or loathe them to annihilate them. Leviticus 26:44. A fool cannot understand this, for God's thoughts are very deep, and on the contrary, Haman's overcoming Vashti and having her put to death was itself part of his downfall, for God precedes the healing to the wound. As our sages have said, Megillah 13b, since that is God's way, to mete out justice against them from among their own. Vashti, in her wickedness, had harshly worked Jewish girls on Shabbat there, 12b. So God paid her back in kind by having her put to death through the anger of Haman and Ahasuerus. Specifically through that, events unfolded such that the righteous Esther caused Ahasuerus to become angry with Haman and have him hanged and all his wealth confiscated and given to Mordecai. As written, Esther appointed Mordecai over Haman's estate. Esther 8:2-4. The word of our God will endure forever. Isaiah 48. Section 5. This is the meaning of human rage will praise you, Psalms 76:11, which Rashi explains as follows. When the nations are enraged, God's name is enhanced, and they acknowledge and praise him upon seeing their own great downfall. You harness the remaining rages, meaning that God brings about their downfall when they become so enraged to the praise. Point of seeking to annihilate the Jewish people as said above, which is specifically by harnessing and raising up against them those with even greater rage, such that their downfall comes about from within their own ranks. The next verse then continues, Vow and pay your vows to God. They will bring a gift to the revered one, meaning that one must vow and pay up the vow, which is to give charity for the sake of heaven in order to restore all wealth to holiness. For the ultimate rectification of wealth is attained through charity, given to deserving poor, as stated in Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 69. Then he will cut the spirit of princes. The spirit of the princes of the realm of evil will be minimized through all the above. Section 6. And the greatest miracle of Purim through Mordecai came about through the profusion of his crying out and screaming to God, leading the Jewish people as well to cry out and scream profusely to God. For there is no other strategy to counter the nations besides this, for our power is only in our mouths. The nations attack the Jewish people in many ways, including the attempt to introduce anger and rage into them, through which they seek to plunder Jewish wealth and to overpower them. So the only strategy is to cry out profusely to God, praying and begging of him, as in, my heart is hot within me when I talk, a flame blazes as I speak with my tongue, Psalms 39. 4. For we must transform the heat that burns in the heart on account of the many troubles that anger seeks to introduce into the heart. Transform it all into prayers, supplications, begging and outcries to God with an impassioned heart, as in, my heart is hot when I speak with my tongue. This corresponds to what is stated in Likutey Moharan, Part 1, 59, that the ultimate rectification of the holy sanctuary is attained through judgment, through judging oneself for everything. This means secluding oneself, to make an account with oneself, judging oneself, and expressing oneself before God with an impassioned heart, such that the fire of judgment will be inflamed and will burn the evil in the souls that are brought near. And the ultimate subdual of the evil of the souls is to neutralize the anger and rage that is in them, as can be understood from the end of that lesson. For the rectification of anger, which corresponds to a name which is attained through the rectification of anger, corresponds itself to the neutralizing of evil from the throne of judgment, from the circle. Study there well, and you will understand. Hence, through prayer and secluded self-examination, one subdues the evil of anger that seeks to damage holy wealth and draw it into the realm of evil. This was Mordecai's entire holy strategy, to cry out profusely to God and lead the Jewish people as well, to cry out and pray to God with an impassioned heart, transforming the heat of anger into the heat of crying out and praying to God, through which is subdued the evil, which is the anger, which corresponds to Haman, which is the source of all the wealth of the nations, and the wicked who oppose the truth, and those who are involved in the construction of the holy sanctuary. Through this is everything overturned, and all the wealth of the realm of evil is transformed into holiness. Then Mordecai left the king's presence in royal garments. Esther 8:15, which represents very great wealth, which was the essence of the miracle, in that the wealth was restored to holiness. Through this, many of the masses became Jewish. There, 17. For when wealth is restored to holiness, then many souls yearn to be included in the name and soul of the tzaddik, causing many to convert and repent, as in, many of the masses became Jewish. Section 7. An allusion to all this can be found in the 6 verses in which are 5 consecutive words of 2 letters each. 1. Noah fathered Shem and Ham. Genesis 5:32. 2. For this one too is a son for you. There 35:17. 3. For a hand is on God's throne. Exodus 17:16. 4. So he did not come to the king's table. 1 Samuel 20:29-5. Neither I nor you shall have 1 Kings 3:26-6. This is nothing but wickedness of heart. Nehemiah 2:2. Noah fathered the authentic tzaddik who is involved in constructing the holy sanctuary. Shem and Ham gives birth to the holy souls that correspond to Shem. A name, as in a living soul, is its name. Genesis 2:19. Thus, the souls are able to come close to the tzaddik by enhancing the name, which is achieved through holy wealth. But the forces of evil that stalk after holiness attack, seeking to intensify the evil of these souls, which is anger and rage, that the tzaddik brings near to him. The authentic tzaddik, though, transforms the evil which corresponds to Ham, to the heat of anger and rage, into impassioned, as in, impassioned is my heart inside me. I have spoken with my tongue, which is crying out and praying to God with an impassioned heart. That is how Noah, the tzaddik, fathered Shem, the souls that he brings close, and Ham, through the heat of the heart, which the forces of evil seek to use for anger and rage. But the tzaddik transforms it into an impassioned heart, through which everything is transformed into holiness, and many souls are thereby born, and God's name is enhanced. This one too is a son for you. For the souls that the tzaddik brings near are called sons. As our sages said, Sanhedrin 99b, and every new soul brought close is considered a son, as in, this one too is a son for you. For a hand is on God's throne. God swore after the battle with Amalek that his name and his throne are not whole until all trace of Amalek is eradicated, and this battle is mainly regarding the above. Amalek's intent in repeatedly attacking the Jewish people is to minimize their name through anger, through which they are able to rob bounty from them, such that God himself is forced to wage battle with them, as in, for a hand is on God's throne, since his name and his throne are not whole until Amalek is eradicated and anger is erased from the world. Then God's name, which is the name of Israel, and the names of the authentic tzaddikim will be enhanced, and everything will return to God, as in, Noah fathered, which also corresponds to the wholeness of the throne, as stated in the lesson regarding the throne of judgment. And the essence of the battle with Amalek is against their desire to confiscate all wealth for themselves, for their own lust and glory, which corresponds to the wealth of the nations and the wicked, who do not endeavor to bring delight to God from their wealth by supporting the truly upright and God-fearing who study Torah. This is, so he did not come to the king's table. The opposer does not want to come with his wealth to the king's table, the king of the world, to support all those who are close to him, who are the authentic tzaddikim and their followers, on account of which neither I nor you shall have. For such wealth brings no success and will be lost in midlife. Jeremiah 17:11. Indeed, this is what the forces of evil desire. They first seduce the opposers to become angry, so that their wealth is from the realm of evil. Then they indict them and strip them of their wealth, leaving them penniless, which is what they are saying, neither I nor you shall have, which is, this is nothing but wickedness of heart, since all this comes from the evil of the heart that corresponds to anger, which is called the evil of the heart. But God battles with the realm of evil, which corresponds to Amalek, as in, for a hand is on God's throne, leading the Jewish people to cry out to him with an impassioned heart, through which he confounds the strategy of the nations and helps the tzaddik to extract the wealth from the realm of evil and restore it to holiness, through which the tzaddik gives birth to many souls, as in, Noah fathered Shem, as in, this one too is a son for you, for the souls that are constantly being drawn to the truth are called sons. Section 8. This is why the gallows Haman makes on which to hang Mordecai are on a 50-cubit high tree to cast Mordecai down from there, seeking to thereby blemish in the root of holy wealth, which corresponds to the enhancement of the name and the soul of the Jewish people, who are all rooted in the names of the tribes that are comprised of 50 letters. That is why these 50 letters of the 12 tribes of God are engraved in the priestly breastplate, which corresponds to wealth, for it was made with very expensive, precious stones. The high priest wore them on his heart, and on these stones were engraved the names of the 12 tribes, who are the root of the souls and names of all Jewish people, who are all rooted in these 50 letters that are engraved on these precious stones that correspond to wealth, for the name and the soul are rooted in wealth. That is why they were in the breastplate of the high priest, to evoke the fire of judgment, to subdue the evil that sought to seize these souls, and the heart of the one who sought to bring them close to God, as explained in the Vayar time. Lesson. Thus it is written, Aaron shall bear the judgment of the Israelites on his heart. Exodus 28:30. And the Rebbe also cites the breastplate in the context of the fire of judgment, where he explains the square as corresponding to judgment, as written regarding the breastplate. It shall be square. There. 16. So Haman sought to cast Mordecai down from there, but with his intense crying out in prayer, Mordecai evoked the fire of judgment, such that he shoveled coals on Haman's head and returned to him what he had planned to do, hanging Haman and his sons specifically on that tree. This was because the entire subdual of Haman came about through these 50 letters that correspond to the holy name of the Jewish people, corresponding to the holy wealth that Mordecai attained. Through this, Mordecai cast down Haman specifically from there and hanged him and his sons from that tree, such that all the wealth returned to holiness. That is why 50 is considered the minimum amount of wealth. As stated, whoever possesses 50 zuz and does business with them should not take from charity. Peah 8:9. For the root of holiness comes from these 50 letters of the names of the tribes, for the name and soul of every Jewish person is rooted there, for that is the source of all wealth, as said. Section 9. This corresponds to the 4 Torah sections and to Pesach. The 4 Torah sections are all preparations for Pesach, for the essence of Pesach is to rectify wealth and elevate it from exile in the realm of evil, from defilement to holiness, to extract wealth from the idolaters and the wicked and restore it to the righteous and upright Jewish people who serve God with all this wealth, thereby enhancing their names and souls, in order to enhance God's name, which is merged with their names, so that many souls will yearn to merge in the holy name. This corresponds to the Pesach sacrifice coming from sheep, which corresponds to wealth, as in flocks of your sheep, Deuteronomy 7:13, which make their owners wealthy, Shulin 84b. That is why the Egyptians worshipped sheep, for the ultimate fall of wealth is in Egypt, in which is all the wealth of the realm of evil, as written, "Woe to those who descend to Egypt for support." But Egypt is human and not divine, Isaiah 31:1, as the Rebbe alludes in the story of the Master of Prayer, which speaks at length about the lust for money, which was made an object of worship. All this is alluded to in that chapter. Isaiah 31 for Egypt was filled with idols, which is the lust for money. For all idolatry is rooted in it, as explained in Likutey Halakhot, Part 1, 23. That is why they worshipped sheep, which corresponds to wealth, and that is why the Israelites were exiled into Egypt, in order to sort out the wealth from there. All the holy sparks, which are the supernal colors, had fallen into wealth, silver and gold, as explained in Likutey Halakhot, Part 1, 56. And the ultimate falling of the sparks was on account of Adam's sin, his eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, and being banished on account of improper sexual relations, with death and the toil and bitterness of earning a livelihood being decreed on him, as written, "With the sweat of your brow you will eat bread until you return to the earth." Genesis 3:19. This was the fall of wealth into wherever it fell, on account of which earning a livelihood is so bitter, and on account of which came about the exile in Egypt. That is why the promise to Abraham was specifically, "Afterward they will leave with great wealth." There, 15:14, for that is the main rectification accomplished by the exile, the sorting out and extracting the wealth from the realm of evil, from the defilement of Egypt into holiness. But due to our many sins, the Jewish people were unable to remain on this level, and the forces of evil seduced them such that they made the golden calf with all the silver and gold, as our sages explain on the verse Deuteronomy 1:1, Brachot 32a, thus blemishing again in wealth. For the forces of evil are mainly attached to the lust for money, in which all holy sparks are contained. This was the cause of all exiles, of the destructions of the first and second temples, on account of which wealth fell again into the realm of evil, and the Jewish people receive only the leftovers. Zohar, Part 2, 152b. This corresponds to, "We will make you golden jewelry with studs of silver," Song of Songs 1:11, which is immediately followed by, "While the king was still at his table, my spikenard gave forth its fragrance." Golden jewelry corresponds to the great wealth that we attained with the exodus from Egypt and the splitting of the Red Sea. As our sages said, Song of Songs Rabbah 1:55, so immediately then comes, "While the king was still at his table," which refers to the sin of the golden calf, as Rashi explains there. For the Jewish people were castigating themselves and acknowledging that they had not withstood the test of abundance after they had been able to sort out and extract the wealth into holiness. But even while the king was at his table, they faltered and made the calf with that great wealth, which was the idolatry of the lust for money, on account of which this exile is so long. But God prepared the healing before the wound and gave us in His compassion the holy festivals that begin with Pesach, during which we evoke every year a rectification for the lust for money, as the Rebbe writes in Likutey Halakhot, Part 2:1. That is why the Pesach sacrifice comes from sheep, which corresponds to the rectification of the lust for money and wealth, which corresponds to sheep, for sacrifices correspond to the nulling of idolatry. Section 10. This is why the Pesach sacrifice had to be eaten roasted on fire. Exodus 12:8 corresponding to the heart of fire there, 3 Two mentioned in the lesson that subdues the evil, that seeks to attach itself to the heart, which corresponds to the fire of anger, which is the ultimate blemish in wealth. This is its head with its legs and its innards. There, 12, 9 for the wealth must be entirely sorted out and restored to holiness, since money provides for all things. Ecclesiastes 10:19. For all things in the world can be purchased with money, which is the cause of the lust for money. For anything can be purchased with money. But whoever possesses authentic intelligence knows that everything is futile. For all money, with all the things and object that money can buy, will all eventually be worn out and perish, nothing remaining of it. The human being with all his desired objects in the world are fundamentally dust, and will return to the dust, and none of one's silver or gold or precious stones or pearls, which are the lusted objects that one purchases with silver and gold, will accompany one. Nothing will remain of them, but only the Torah and good deeds alone. That is why, when the Jewish people bring their wealth to the tzaddikim elevate all this money together with all the objects that are bought with it, elevating it all into holiness for the glory of God alone. That is why our sages said, the ewe is entirely holy. Its horns are for trumpets. Its hide is for drums. Its wool for tzitzit. Rashi, on Song of Songs 6, meaning that sheep, which is wealth at its root in holiness, is entirely holy, for wonderful things are made with it, and amazing melodies and songs, through raise a melody and bring a drum, Psalms 81:3, which is the rectification of business dealings and holy wealth, as in, the heart receives it with the joy of the Levitic melody, as explained in Likutey Halakhot, part 113. That is why the Torah instructed that the Pesach sacrifice, which is the rectification of the lust for money, must be roasted on fire in its entirety, its head with its legs and its innards, in order to sort out, elevate all wealth into holiness from head to toe, as in, this ewe is entirely holy. Section 11. This corresponds to the prohibition of chametz and the commandment of eating matzah, for there is only an infinitesimal difference between chametz and matzah, which is the infinitesimal difference between anger and wealth, which is dependent upon a hair's breadth difference, as can be understood from the lesson. This is because the main difference is the point that differentiates between the letter chet and the letter hey. Matzah is written with a hey, which corresponds to wealth, as in, hey, here is seed for you, Genesis 47:23, which is the bounty of wealth that Joseph brought into Egypt. Since God had arranged that wealth should come to Egypt specifically through Joseph, so that the Israelites would thereby have the power later on to sort it out and return it to its owner. Chametz, though, is written with a chet, which corresponds to kema, rage and anger, as kema is written with a chet. That is why matzah is called bread of poverty, Deuteronomy 16:3, for it is the rectification of the poverty that was suffered in exile, as Rashi explains on that verse. Since the ultimate rectification of wealth is attained through poverty, in other words, one must not pride oneself, but consider oneself as a pauper, no matter what status one has, whether literally a pauper, or middle class, or very wealthy one, must always consider oneself as a great pauper. As King David, who even at the peak of his kingship, power and great wealth always said, I am a pauper and needy, Psalms 109:22, Psalms 76. For a person must understand their great poverty in this world, since even a tzaddik cannot fulfill his obligation to God in this world. As written, there is no tzaddik on earth who does only good, Ecclesiastes 7:20, all the more so the rest of us. Thus, even a bit of bread and water we don't deserve according to our deeds, only that God in His compassion sustains the world. As written, He gives food to all flesh, for His loving kindness is forever, Psalms 136:25. And there is thus no greater pauper than such a one who cannot earn his own bread. When one takes this truth to heart and knows this with clarity, then one will always have it good and will attain true wealth. As our sages said, who is wealthy? The one who is contented with his lot. Avot 4. One for this person will always be contented with his portion, since he knows that everything is God's great compassion, even a bit of bread and water. In this way, one attains wealth, literally all the wealth of the world, as in, whoever is small is great. Zohar, Part 1, 1:22a. Whoever is small in their own eyes and is content and accepts everything with love and joy will thereby attain wealth and greatness, as written. Impoverished but a great fortune. Proverbs 13:7. And he lifts the needy one out of the dust, to sit him among the princes. Psalms 113:7. Specifically lift from the dust, meaning one who considers themselves as dust. And even after such a person attains literal wealth of silver, gold, and many possessions, they do not thereby fall into lusting what is not theirs. For even in great wealth, they continue to consider themselves as a pauper and are always content with their portion. The wicked, though, are the opposite of all this. When in poverty, they are angry at God over their poverty and neediness, and as soon as they obtain some money, they immediately purchase clothing for themselves that is beyond their means, on account of which they are now even more needy than before. Then when they earn more money, they begin to purchase silver vessels, pearls, and luxuries worth many times their assets, which causes them to always lead bitter lives. Many of them, in fact, are more embittered in their wealth than they were in their poverty, leading many of them to commit suicide, as is well known. But usually, these people end up back in literal poverty and die bankrupt. But even during their wealthy days, they were great paupers, since they always lacked what their lifestyles and needs demanded of them. All this on account of their gross materiality, and their not reflecting upon their eternal purpose, assuming as if all wealth should rightfully be theirs. Thus, one who is great is small, for whoever is prideful is cast down by God and dies in poverty and debt. This corresponds to poverty is appropriate for the Jewish people. Chagiga 9b. For the ultimate beauty is poverty, meaning the one who always considers themselves a pauper is always beautiful, for whatever they have is always beautiful in their eyes, even a linen garment sewn together of patches. Everything is beautiful for this person, and just having a garment to wear is cause for great joy, since one knows that even such a garment one does not deserve based on one's deeds. This person is thus always beautiful, for even when this person attains garments of silk, silver, and gold, they will still be beautiful in their eyes. But the one who does not consider themselves a pauper, and the more they have, the more they lust, will never attain beauty, as we see for ourselves, that even when such people wear expensive silk garments, they are always lacking more expensive ones, worn by even wealthier people, and so on, as is well known. Understand this deeply. This corresponds to the matzah that we eat on Pesach, which is the rectification of money and wealth. Matzah is called the bread of poverty, corresponding to the broken matzah, as a pauper eats broken bread. Pesachim, anano, 115b, meaning that the ultimate rectification of money and wealth is through poverty, by always considering oneself a pauper, as said. This corresponds to the pauper eating broken bread, in that the pauper is always breaking his bread and livelihood, for they feel that whatever they have, they deserve only half as much. So they are never lacking anything and are always content with their lot, which is the ultimate wealth through which they attain literal wealth in this world and the next. That is why it is written regarding the Pesach sacrifice, "It shall be eaten with matzah and bitter herbs." Exodus 18:2. For the Pesach sacrifice, which corresponds to the wealth of sheep, must be eaten specifically with matzah, which corresponds the bread of poverty and bitterness, to remind us of the poverty that we suffered in Egypt. In other words, we must remember the bitterness of poverty even during wealth, so that we do not become prideful. This corresponds to better a poor but wise child than an old and foolish king. For even were he to become king, he would remain a pauper. Ecclesiastes 4:13-14, meaning that even in royalty and wealth, he considers himself a pauper. For a person must constantly maintain the extreme and remember that one was born naked, as written, I came naked from my mother's belly, Job 1:21, which is the ultimate poverty, while on the other hand, countering this poverty is considering that everything one owns as great wealth. Then one will always rejoice in one's portion, no matter what it is, whether a bit or a lot. But as soon as one looks to those who have more and becomes jealous, one will certainly always lack. Thus, the ultimate wealth is considering oneself a pauper, for then, whatever one has, one is wealthy. Whereas, when one forgets one's poverty, one is then the greatest pauper, for one will always be lacking more and more. Section 12. This corresponds to, this is the bread of poverty, Pesach Haggadah, in which we declare, let all hungry come and eat, let all needy come, which is, as said above. First we tell that the matzah corresponds to bread of poverty, that we recall the poverty of the exile and acknowledge the truth of our poverty in all respects. And then as soon as we acknowledge this, God helps us and fills all that we lack, such that we are then able to give to others. That is why we immediately say, let all hungry come and eat. For specifically through bread of poverty do we attain great wealth, such that whoever desires can come and feast with us. This is also why we then immediately remove the plate from the table and ask the 4 questions, the essence of which revolves around this very point. We ask about the many contradictions that we see on this great night, such as refraining from eating chametz, which seems to correspond to wealth, since leavened bread is certainly more tasty, rich, and the bread of the wealthy, than matzah, unleavened bread. Yet, this night we eat only matzah, which corresponds to poverty, to bread of poverty. Then we note the contrast between all nights on which we do not dip even once, whereas this night we dip twice, and dipping food is a sign of wealth and freedom. Then we ask about other contradictions, about eating tasty vegetables on all other nights, but only bitter herbs on this night, which alludes to the bitterness of poverty and earning a livelihood, and about eating on all other nights, sitting or reclining, but on this night only reclining, which is the way of freedom, of the wealthy and the royalty. To these questions, we respond by telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt, that we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt and lived in great poverty and distress, for they possessed all wealth and were the kings, princes, and judges who ruled over us. But God took us out of there with great wealth and brought us to the land of Israel, restoring the bounty and wealth to us, as we recall, by declaring His fulfilling His promise. Then they will leave with great possession, Genesis 15:14, by giving us their wealth. But why was all this bother necessary? To first exile us and then take us out with this wealth? Why didn't He give us this wealth without our having to endure the exile? However, all this was for our good, to refine us in the iron furnace of exile, in order to refine and purify the wealth, to extract us from the lust for money, which is the wealth and money of the realm of evil. When the more one has, the more one lacks, about which is said, God's curse is in the house of the wicked, Proverbs 3:33, and the belly of the wicked is lacking, there, 13:25. So attaining holy wealth is specifically through poverty, for which reason we are obligated to eat only matzah, bread of poverty, and bitter herbs, and to make all these changes from the norm in order to know and always remember the poverty and bitterness, specifically through which we attain wealth. That is why we recline on beds in a show of freedom as kings do, for whoever does not recall their poverty and bitterness in times of wealth and kingship is not considered having wealth at all. For about them is said, wealth saved for its owner to their detriment, Ecclesiastes 5:12. This is worse than a pauper, for this person is lacking more, such that their bitterness is worse than death, as we see for ourselves. For this reason, we remove the plate from the table before the meal, to allude that the meal is not ours and that we have no permission to partake of it until we have first recounted God's kindness and wonders of extracting the bounty from the realm of evil, from the exile in Egypt, and giving it to us. Only then do sustenance and wealth return to us, and are we able to eat. This corresponds to what is told in the Holy Zohar about Rav Himnuna, who would not eat even when the table was all set before him until he had prayed for his food, saying, I will not eat until it is given from the king's palace. Zohar, Part 1, 159. A meaning that this meal is not his until he has earned it through his prayer. For sustenance is extracted from exile specifically through prayer as known. Section 13. Similarly, in every generation one must see oneself as if one has left Egypt oneself, as stated in the Haggadah, for the above is relevant in every generation, for each individual, and at all times. The bitterness of the exile for each individual according to their level, and the redemption to the extent that one evokes some aspect of freedom and soul redemption upon themselves, is all according to the redemption above. When one is able to break the lust for money by coming close to authentic tzaddikim, which essentially means to be content with one's portion, which is attained by sensing one's poverty in all aspects, physical, spiritual, and financial, one specifically thereby attains some aspect of redemption of wealth, such that one is able to attain literal wealth even materially. This is the essence of the complete redemption through our righteous Messiah, whom we anticipate and long for, when all wealth will be restored to holiness, to the Jewish people, who will then all be righteous. As written, in place of copper I will bring gold, Isaiah 60:17, and I will make your windows of translucent stone, and all your landscape of precious stones. There, 54:12 wealth that was not attained even at the exodus from Egypt, wealth that was never heard of. But the Jewish people will attain such wealth specifically through their poverty that they have borne in this bitter exile. And even after they leave the exile and attain such wealth, they will not forget their poverty, for they will then be authentically humble. As written, a poor and needy people will take refuge in him, Zephaniah 3:12. And the Messiah himself will also be called poor, as written, a pauper riding on a donkey, Zechariah 9:9. For authentic wealth, material and spiritual, is attained through authentic poverty and humility. Section 14. This is why afterward they will leave with great wealth is immediately followed in the Haggadah by, that is what stood by our ancestors. Our survival in this bitter exile is ultimately through God's promise to Abraham. Also the people they will serve I will judge, and afterward they will leave with great wealth. Genesis 15:14. And our sages comment that also comes to include the servitude in later exiles, the essence of which is their usurping the bounty of wealth for themselves, through which they are able to rule over us. But God preempted this and promised us through our ancestors, afterward they will leave with great wealth, and from that promise we receive even now the bit of bounty that we have, so that we will be able to survive in this bitter exile until the redemption. This promise was that the Jewish people must endure the exile as foreigners, as if all bounty and wealth belongs to others, but all for the good, so that we come to realize our poverty and lowliness and return to Him, through which the bit of bounty that is ours becomes worth more than all of their wealth. Through this, there are tzaddikim and upright, who attain great wealth even in the exile, on account of which we are able to survive the exile, despite all the opposing nations and all the opposers to the truth. Not only one has arisen against us to annihilate us, but in every generation they arise against us to annihilate us. But God saves us from their hands through the holy elders who sustain us in this exile and evoke upon us the holy bounty in wondrous and amazing ways until we will attain. complete redemption speedily in our days. Amen. Section 15. This corresponds to the Omer counting. The 49 days of the counting correspond to the 49 letters in the names of the 12 tribes of God, which correspond to the totality of Jewish names. The name and soul of every Jewish person is rooted in the 49 letters of the names of the tribes, meaning that through the mitzvah of counting the 49 days of the Omer, each individual thereby rectifies their name and soul, which is the enhancement of their name and soul through holy wealth that is attained by breaking anger. That is why the counting begins with the bringing of the Omer offering. For by bringing the barley Omer offering, we ameliorate all harsh judgments that are embodied by barley, through which we ameliorate and nullify the power of anger, which comes from harsh judgments, which is also the root of souls. For at their root they are one and the same, which is the root of wealth, as explained in Likutey Halakhot, Part 1, 68 and 69. But when harsh judgments are not ameliorated at their root, then the forces of evil overpower and transform wealth into anger, and the soul is torn apart by one's anger. Job 18:4, as explained in the lesson. Thus, after the barley Omer offering, through which we ameliorate all harsh judgments at their root, we thereby ameliorate the power of the forces of evil and attain an enhancement of the name and the soul, which corresponds to the 49 days of the Omer counting, which correspond to the name and soul of every individual Jewish person who are embodied in the 49 letters of the names of the tribes. This is why we pray for sustenance after the Omer counting, by reciting the verse, "The land has given forth its bounty, may He bless us." Psalms 67:7. For through the counting, we ameliorate and nullify all anger, and evoke the blessing of sustenance and holy wealth. This is why the manna began to descend in the month of Iyar, Exodus 16:1, which is the majority of the 49 days of Omer counting. For the manna corresponds to holy sustenance and wealth that are evoked during the days of the counting. Section 16. This is why the Omer was brought from barley, which is animal feed, for through its offering we ameliorate and elevate the animal to the human, through which we ameliorate and nullify the power of anger. Anger causes a disappearance of one's wisdom, which is the human image of God, and one then resembles an animal. For whoever loses their temper loses their wisdom. Pesakim 66b, as explained well in Likutey Halakhot, Part 1, 57. Thus, the rectification is attained through the barley Omer offering, through which we elevate the animal to the human, and one's wisdom is restored, which is the essence of the rectification of anger. This corresponds to the evoking of the minds during the days of the counting, as explained in the Kabbalistic intentions, for during this time we are involved in ameliorating judgments and nullifying anger, which was the cause for the minds to disappear. For through the counting, we evoke and restore the minds on each day. Section 17. This rectification is attained by counting the days of the Omer, for by reckoning and counting the days we thereby evoke the rectification of judgment spoken about at the beginning of the lesson. This rectification of judgment must be evoked every single day, as in, to carry out the judgment of His servant and the judgment of His people Israel day by day. 1 Kings 8:59. For a person is judged every single day, and one must thus preempt this by judging oneself at the beginning of every day in order to ameliorate and nullify the judgment on high. This itself is the amelioration and nullifying of anger, for the essence of anger is caused by the empowering of judgments, and to the extent that one is able to nullify the judgments through judging oneself, to that extent one nullifies the anger, which is itself what is explained at the beginning of the lesson, that through judgment one nullifies and burns the evil of the souls that one brings close. For the ultimate evil is anger, as explained there on the verse, remove anger from your heart, and remove evil from your flesh. Ecclesiastes 11:1. Study the lesson well, for it is all one concept. It is also understood from there that anger, which is a blemish in the name and the soul, is itself a blemish in the holy sanctuary, caused by the evil of the souls. So hence, the evil, which is anger, is nullified by the fire of judgment. This is what we evoke through the Omer counting. We must make a reckoning of every single day, which corresponds to judgment. For the essence of judgment is the reckoning with a person regarding what they did every single day. As our sages said, before whom you will give judgment and reckoning. Avot 3:1. So whoever wants to have compassion on themselves and to spare themselves from this judgment and reckoning on high should judge themselves and reckon with themselves every single day. That is why during the days of the Omer counting, which are a preparation for receiving the Torah and for bringing oneself and all those dependent upon one closer to God, which is the ultimate construction of the holy sanctuary, we therefore must count each day at its onset in order to be aware that all days are counted and reckoned, which corresponds to judgment, which is every day. In other words, one must reckon with oneself regarding every day and judge oneself. And through this judgment, one's heart is aroused, which burns one's evil, which is anger, through which one enhances one's name and soul through holy wealth, which corresponds to the 49 days of the Omer counting. Section 18. This is because the main cause of one's wasting the days of one's life is the lust for money and wealth, and the struggle of earning a livelihood, as we see for ourselves. And as the Rebbe writes on the verse, "You will eat dust all the days of your life." Genesis 3:14. Likutey Halakhot, Part 1. 23. And the main cause of each individual's lack of sustenance and great bitterness and toil is anger, which was caused by Adam's sin of blemishing in the tree of knowledge, regarding which is said, "A fool's anger will become known on the day," Proverbs 12:16, which our sages, Rashi, refers to the day on which, "With the sweat of your brow will you eat bread," was decreed. For whoever nullifies anger always attains wealth, for they are always content with their lot, through which one attains literal wealth. But regarding whoever does not break their anger, it is said, "When they hunger and become angry," Isaiah 8:21. And even when this person possesses wealth, they are filled with anger, as written, "All his days are anger and pains." Ecclesiastes 2:23. For they are always lacking more and more. That is why all of their wealth is as nothing, as said, "If you lack wisdom, what have you acquired?" Nedarim 41a. And lacking wisdom corresponds to anger, as in, whoever becomes angry, their wisdom will depart from them. Pesachim 66b. And thus, what have you acquired? For all one's wealth is thus certainly worthless, since one constantly lacks more and more, regarding which is said, "Wealth saved for its owner to their detriment." Ecclesiastes 5:12. In the end, one will be left with nothing, as written, "He will take nothing with him," there. 14. And one who attains wealth unjustly will lose it in the middle of his days. Jeremiah 17:11. Specifically in midlife, for one will not be able to complete one's days through the rectification of judgment that nullifies anger and completes the days, but one will waste one's days, as we see for ourselves how people waste their days pursuing money. Thus we find in ethical literature, people worry over wasting their money, but do not worry over wasting their days, for the two are interdependent. Thus, during the Omer counting, when we are involved in completing and enhancing the name and the soul through holy wealth, we therefore count the days, which corresponds to judgment, through which the days are rectified by the nullifying of anger, and one thereby attains holy wealth, to be content with one's lot and not be angry over one's lack. Through this, one attains literal wealth, for to the extent that one nullifies anger, one attains wealth. This corresponds to the 7 whole weeks of the counting, no day of which should be blemished by anger, which would cause one's soul to be torn apart and one's days lost. One must thus count the days at their onset so that they will be whole, in order to evoke a rectification of judgment at the onset of the day, in order to spare one's soul from anger. Through this one's days will be whole, through which one's soul will be merged with all the souls that are dependent upon one, as in the holy sanctuary, to come close to God and to His holy Torah, which corresponds to the preparation for Shavuot, which is the receiving of the Torah. Section 19. This is why the students of Rabbi Akiva died during the days of the Omer counting, on account of the quarrels that existed between them, Yevamot 62b, on account of which they did not ameliorate and nullify the anger properly. So, they died specifically during the days of the Omer counting, when we are involved in nullifying anger in which they blemished. That is why they died specifically during this time, and why Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said, "But we are dependent upon love." Zohar, Part 3, 188a. For that is the ultimate rectification and nullification of anger and quarrels by evoking love and kindness. Section 20. This corresponds to Lag BaOmer, which corresponds to "This mound shall be a testimony," Genesis 31:52. Lavan had been pursuing Jacob and all the souls of his family, mainly on account of his jealousy over the great wealth that Jacob had amassed, as stated. Jacob has taken all that had belonged to our father. There, one for all souls are dependent upon wealth. Had God not protected Jacob, Lavan would have annihilated them all, as we recite in the Haggadah, an Aramean annihilator of my ancestor. Thus, immediately after we recite in the Haggadah, afterward they will leave with great wealth. We declare, this is what stood by our ancestors. For in every generation they stand up against us to annihilate us, but God saves us from their hand. Come see what Lavan the Aramean sought to do to our forefather Jacob. As said, Lavan's anger against Jacob was mainly on account of the wealth he had amassed, upon which were dependent all of our souls, which is why Jacob stressed, "If not that, the God of my father, the God of Abraham, you would have sent me empty-handed." There, 42. And after God saved Jacob from Lavan, and Jacob retained his wealth with the holy souls, "This mound shall be a testimony that I not trespass to you," which alludes to Lag BaOmer, which is the main rectification of the Omer counting, through which holy wealth is evoked by having subdued the power of Lavan, the Aramean, who attacks holy wealth. For we evoke this testimony, which corresponds to the subdual of the Aramean to Jacob, when all wealth and souls are restored to holiness. Completed and concluded. Praise be to God, Creator of the world. Blessed is he who gives strength to the weary, and to those without power he gives great strength.